The Marlene Oaks case. Who owns the skull found in the woods? A crime is considered perfect when it has achieved its main goal and the perpetrator has not been punished or has not been suspected at all. However, these days, thanks to the latest technology and scientific approach, it is becoming increasingly difficult to commit such a thing. Moreover, even old, unsolved cases that seemed perfect in the past are being successfully solved decades later. In 1980, an auto mechanic named William Bill Major also thought he had committed the perfect crime that would never be solved. Hardly a man could have guessed that, more than 2 decades later, he will still have to stand trial and get a well-deserved sentence. And the initiator of the new investigation was his own daughter, whom he deprived of a mother in early childhood. And now, let's study the whole story in detail, deconstruct this perfect crime and imminent punishment. To be fair, it should be noted that this high-profile and very cruel case of the disappearance of a young mother, Marlene Oaks, could have been solved back in the distant 80s because the victim herself, who had a premonition of her imminent death, left many clues to the police, to which the law enforcers for some reason did not pay due attention. Marlene Oaks, the early years. A girl named Helen Marlene Oaks was born in 1954, the 7th of December, in the small town of Martinsville, in the state of Virginia, and was the middle of 3 children of the spouses Lorraine and William Oaks. She was raised with an older brother and a younger sister. Their family lived quite modestly, but the parents always tried to provide their children with everything they needed and bring them up worthy people. By the way, our today's heroine from childhood preferred to use her middle name, Marlene, which she liked much more than Helen. She was petite and very cute blonde, with brown eyes and a charming smile, so it was not surprising that she had a lot of admirers from an early age. At the age of 16, barely out of school, the girl, wanting to soon start an independent life and escape from parental care, hurried to tie herself to the bonds of marriage. Her chosen one was a man named William Major, who was 10 years older than her, but the couple in love, the difference in age did not confuse. The chosen one worked as an auto mechanic and seemed to the girl a serious and reliable man. Unhappy family life. Soon after the couple officially legalized their relationship, they settled in a trailer park on the outskirts of a small country town of Verona, located in Boone County, Kentucky. In 1972, the couple had their first common heir, a son, to whom they decided to give the name Donald. At that time, Marlene was barely 17 years old, and her husband was already 27 years old. 4 years later, the couple had a younger daughter, Lalana. The couple still lived in a small trailer on the grounds of the trailer park. Marlene was a homemaker, raising their children and making their modest home comfortable, while Bill worked at a service station fixing cars. He was good at what he did and was, so to speak, a jack of all trades. He had every chance to build a brilliant career, to open his own business, but the man did not particularly strive for anything. Money spouses barely enough for the essentials, but the head of the family, every time he managed to earn a little more, as a rule, spent it all on drink. Later, his addictions were joined by the use of illegal substances. At the same time, Bill was a sociable person, sociable and seemed very friendly to others. All these qualities helped him a lot in his work. People who turned to his workshop for help often came back again and also recommended Majors as a good specialist to their friends. However, at home, Bill became a completely different person, rude, selfish, and cruel. Former feelings that had once linked their lives together with Marlene seemed to have evaporated without a trace, left only misunderstanding, resentment, and irritation. The couple often quarreled, and sometimes their heated arguments escalated into violence. Bill was not a caring husband and loving father, and over time he became more and more like a domestic tyrant. A new neighbor and a secret lover. In 1978, a young Canadian named Glenn St. Hiller was passing through the town of Verona, and his truck suddenly broke down. On the advice of the locals, he went to the workshop of Bill Major, who willingly undertook to repair the vehicle. The stranger was traveling from Ohio to Texas, He didn't know anyone in the area, and the only hotel in the suburbs was closed, and he simply didn't know where to stay. When Glenn complained to the auto mechanic about the situation he found himself in, Bill promised to help, and quickly found him a place to stay in a trailer park and invited him over for dinner. The guest was literally enchanted by Marlene's beauty, her kindness and friendliness. The young woman cooked a delicious meal, willingly and with interest kept the conversation, seemed very nice and open. 2 weeks later, Glenn visited Verona again to thank Bill for his help, and after another month he decided to move here for a while. The man settled in the same suburban trailer park and took a job in Bill's shop, becoming Bill's subordinate. Also, the new neighbor began to show interest in Marlene, and in every possible way sought meetings with her. The situation in the family Major has long been very tense. The spouses only quarreled, shouted at each other, exchanged insults, and sometimes even fought. For Marlene, communication with kind and courteous Glenn became a real outlet. They quickly became close, and soon became lovers. The couple spent all their free time together, trying to hide from prying eyes, but in a quiet suburb where everyone knows each other, gossip spreads quickly. Soon the rumors reached Bill, but the cheating husband didn't seem particularly upset about it. Moreover, he even strangely encouraged their relationship, and he seemed to have lost interest in his young wife. The explanation for this behavior was soon found, and it turned out to be truly monstrous. Major, as it turned out, had an unhealthy interest in his own children, and soon he began to realize his secret fantasies. The ugly truth and the beginning of the divorce proceedings. Soon, Marlene noticed some oddities and changes in the behavior of 8-year-old Donald. The boy became withdrawn, nervous, did not sleep well, and was afraid to be alone with his father. When his mother decided to have a frank talk with him, the child told her the terrible things his father did to him and asked her to protect him. Marlene was horrified by her son's confessions and realized that it was simply impossible to continue living like this. She had long planned to divorce Bill, get sole custody of the children, and move with Glenn and the kids to her native Virginia, closer to her parents. Her lover also suggested that she do this, and now there was a real reason to hurry up with the divorce and move. Marlene told her husband everything she had learned from her son about his unacceptable behavior, declared her intention to divorce, and also threatened to report him to the police. The scandal quickly escalated into manhandling, and Bill hit his wife hard in the face several times. From that moment, the spouses were literally in a state of war. Marlene initiated the beginning of the divorce process, but separated from her husband. She could not yet because of the children, because she wanted to achieve officially sole custody of them. Her husband beat her almost daily, insulted her, and threatened to kill her. He promised to kill her and said that he would make sure that no one would ever find the body and that he would stay with the children. The unhappy young woman simply did not know what to do. She secretly kept a personal diary in which she wrote down everything Bill said to her, how he threatened to kill her and cover his tracks. Moreover, several times, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, Bill described in detail how he would get rid of his wife, dismembered her, and hid the remains in different places. The most important role in hiding the crime he assigned to the removal of all the teeth, so that the body would not be identified by dental records. It is noteworthy that all these terrible things Major and Colors described not only his wife, but also some of his friends, who, however, did not take his words seriously. Meanwhile, the situation was escalating, and the neighbors who lived in the trailer park became daily witnesses of the stormy marital strife. Marlene runs away with no kids and no lover. Everyone knew that Marlene had filed for divorce and was planning to move to another state with Glenn and the children. No one judged Marlene. Everyone knew how difficult and unhealthy the situation was in her family. But relatives and neighbors expected that everything would be resolved in a peaceful and civilized way. On October 11, 1980, around noon, the spouses once again loudly scandalized, but soon all quieted down. Toward nightfall, an agitated and angry Bill led the children to one of the neighboring trailers and knocked. He said that his wife had run off with her lover, leaving his son and daughter behind, and asked him to watch the kids until tomorrow while he tried to find Marlene and bring her home. The neighbors agreed to shelter the children for the night, and immediately thought that the young woman had run away with Glenn, but wondered how a loving and caring mother could abandon her adored offspring. What was everyone's bewilderment when Glenn came out of his trailer in the morning, and to all the questions about the escape, he only stared at those around him incomprehensibly. It turned out that he had not seen his beloved since yesterday, and in general was not aware that she disappeared somewhere. Then Glenn himself went to Bill to clarify the situation, but the furious husband only shouted that his wife found another lover and lost her head. However, Glenn did not believe his words, because he knew for sure that no other man at Marlene was not, and she under no circumstances would not abandon the children. A day later, Major himself went to the police, where he reported the disappearance of his wife, outlining his version of events. He added that their family car had also disappeared, which he believed supported the runaway version. But the police also found the whole story very strange. They had the impression that Bill was making it up as he went along, sometimes contradicting himself and confusing himself in elementary clarifying questions. Search for the missing woman, interrogation of witnesses. The police decided to begin the investigation of this case with a survey of neighbors and relatives of the couple, as well as studying the circumstances of the disappearance of the young woman. All unanimously spoke about the difficult relationship between the spouses, but claimed that Marlene would never have left Donald and Lalana because she loved them more than life. There were also those who heard about Bill's creepy stories about how he would kill his wife and dispose of the body. This prompted the man's arrest and interrogation, but he himself claimed that it was just drunken chatter, and he didn't really intend to harm his spouse. The next oddity was that a search of the house revealed the missing woman's passport, wallet with cash and driver's license, as well as all of her personal belongings. It seemed as if she had just gotten into a car and left without her belongings, money, or documents. But where to? Marlene's relatives could not answer this question, but her sister mentioned about their last disturbing phone conversation, that Oaks was afraid for her life, and kept a diary in which she wrote down everything that happened to her. The information about the diary was of great interest to the detectives, but nothing similar was found when they searched the trailer. A few days later, Glenn showed up at the police station with the diary. He explained that Marlene had left her notes for him to keep, in case something happened to her, or she disappeared somewhere without a trace. When the woman did go missing, he waited a few days and then, realizing she wasn't coming back, took the notebook to the station. The pages contained some truly gruesome entries, including beatings, humiliation, and threats. There was also a detailed description of how Bill had promised to kill his wife. In addition, Marlene wrote about the fact that the husband showed a sick interest in children. In this regard, it was decided to talk to Marlene's son, but he did not provide any valuable information, practically did not answer questions, and only constantly asked to let him go home. For some reason, the detectives did not pay attention to the fact that the boy was scared and simply could not truthfully answer questions. His father had interviewed him beforehand, and Donald was afraid to say anything unnecessary for fear of his parents' anger. They decided not to traumatize 4-year-old Lalana and did not interrogate her. For the next few weeks, police officers scoured the neighborhood looking for any leads or clues. Marlene and her car were wanted statewide, but the young woman and the vehicle seemed to have vanished into thin air. There was no reason to believe she was dead or murdered. The investigation has reached a dead end. The move looks like an escape. Despite the fact that relatives and neighbors testified against Bill, and the man himself was repeatedly called in for questioning, no grounds for his arrest were ever found. Neither a body nor any conclusive evidence that Marlene might have been seriously injured was found, and she was still missing. Major began to quickly sell off his property, explaining that he was going to move closer to his parents because it is very difficult for him to manage 2 children after the escape of his wife. Among other things, he sold his weapons, namely a rifle, a shotgun, and a couple of pistols. His strange behavior resembled not a preparation for moving, but an ordinary escape. To the children, Bill kept telling them that their mother never loved them, so she abandoned them. He said that Marlene was an alcoholic, that she had tons of lovers who were more important to her than her family. Bill diligently turned his son and daughter against their own mother, trying to make them hate the most dear person. It should be noted that he succeeded quite well, because Donald and Lalana were still small and blindly believed their father. Soon Bill and his children moved to the state of Rhode Island, where his parents lived. There they purchased a trailer and settled down for many years. But after the disappearance of Marlene, in the life of Donald and Lalana began a real black streak. Their father brutally beat them, abused them, humiliated them, and did even more terrible things. At first, it was mostly Donald who was subjected to these tortures, but as Lalana grew older, the bitter fate did not spare her. About a year later, the man had a new lover named Pauline, with whom they began to live together, but could not legalize their relationship because Major was still married to the missing Marlene. Nevertheless, the couple had a child together, and for some time the family lived a quiet life, until one day Pauline herself did not witness what Bill was doing with his own son. She immediately went to the police, telling them everything, took her child, and left. Bill was eventually arrested, and his children went to live with their maternal grandparents in Virginia. A gruesome find in the woods. About a year and a half after Marlene's mysterious disappearance, a hunter came across a frightening sight in a wooded area near a Verona trailer park. He saw that his dog had started digging in the ground, and something resembling a fragment of a human skull emerged. The man immediately reported it to the police, and the arriving experts confirmed his hunch. It was indeed a badly damaged skull. The found remains were immediately sent to forensic experts for a detailed study, and the conclusions of experts were really frightening. The skull had a missing lower jaw and not a single tooth. There were 2 bullet holes in it, and the shots were made at point-blank range. And also the experts revealed on the bones chopped marks from a large knife or axe, which probably separated the head from the body. It was impossible to determine unequivocally to whom this skull belonged, but judging from the size and condition of the bones, it was assumed that it was a young woman, under 30 years of age. Naturally, the story of Marlene's disappearance immediately came to mind. The entire area within a radius of several kilometers was thoroughly combed, but no other remains or belongings were found, and so the discovery was dubbed Jane Doe, which means unknown, and the search was suspended. A new investigation 20 years later. When Donald and Lalana moved into their grandparents' house, their lives gradually got better. Most of all, they were afraid of the day when their father would be released, but Bill, after his release, was not interested in his grown-up offspring at all, and did not even try to get in touch with them. For a long time, Lalana did not talk about her mother at all, because she was angry at her for leaving them with a tyrant father. But one day, during a frank conversation with her grandmother, Lalana asked her why her mother had fallen out of love with her and her brother and left the family. To what the old woman replied that she did not believe in the story of the escape and believes that it was her spouse has dealt with her. At this point, the girl's world turned upside down. She looked at the situation in a completely different way and realized that the grandmother was right. The girl decided to conduct her own investigation and uncover the mystery of her mother's disappearance. The first thing Lalana did was to keep a notebook in which she wrote down everything she could remember from her childhood, as well as everything her older brother knew and remembered. In 1998, when the girl was already 22 years old, she decided to go to her native Verona in order to talk to former neighbors and find out if any of them have valuable information that will help her. As it turned out, in those places still lived Glenn, who did not lose hope that one day the mystery of the disappearance of his beloved will be solved. His personal life has not developed. The man was lonely, worked at a local factory, and was constantly interested in the investigation of the case of Marlene Oaks. It was from Glenn Lalana learned about the diary that her mother kept, which she gave him for safekeeping before her disappearance. This diary was later added to the case file and lost somewhere on the shelves of the police archives. Lalana was able to get permission to see her mother's writings and was literally shocked by the contents of the diary. Not only did her mother know she was about to die, but she also gave the name of her killer, the method of death, and the process of hiding the evidence. After reading the notes, the girl immediately rushed to her father, whom she had not seen for more than 10 years, in order to find out the truth. It should be noted that Bill, after his release from prison, remarried, but in 1995 he had a stroke, and since then he has been confined to a wheelchair. When he learned the reason for his daughter's visit, he only laughed in her face. Lalana begged him to tell her where he had hidden Marlene's remains so that she could give her mother a decent burial. The girl promised that she would not go to the police, and everything Bill said would remain just between them. But the father only insulted his daughter, called her crazy, and said that she would never know what happened to her mother. From her mother's diary, Lalana learned about the perfect crime her father was preparing, which included dismembering her, removing all of her teeth, and burying the remains in different places. Also, Lalana, who along with her brother was bullied by Bill as a child, found out some horrific details from her father's biography. It turned out that even before meeting their mother, Bill served time for harassment. But for some reason, this circumstance police officers passed over when entrusted Majoru custody of the children after the disappearance of their mother. In 2000, 2 decades after Marlene's disappearance, her daughter initiated a new investigation into the case, providing all the materials she had managed to collect on her own. Lalana and her brother were re-interviewed, and this time they recounted everything their father had done to them, the beatings being the least of their troubles. At the same time, Lalana learned about an unidentified skull fragment with no teeth or lower jaw that had been found in the local woods a year and a half after her mother's disappearance. She began to insist on the need for DNA testing, but at the time the procedure was extremely expensive, and government agencies refused to cover the cost. However, Lalana did not even think of giving up and organized a fund to raise money for the procedure. Relatives, neighbors, and just concerned people joined in, and eventually, by the beginning of 2001, Lalana already had the necessary amount of money to carry out the identification procedure. The analysis established the degree of the girl's kinship with the previously unidentified remains and determined that the skull fragment found did indeed belong to the missing Marlene Oaks. Then Lalana, already having the results of the examination, went to her paternal grandfather to talk to him and find out if he knows anything. The elderly man was shocked by the news and agreed to testify to the police against his own son. Bill's father said that back in 1980, his son, being in a state of alcoholic intoxication, told him that he killed his wife with 2 shots in the head, dismembered her body with a hunting knife, and buried the remains in different places at an impressive distance from each other. At the same time, he got rid of the lower jaw and teeth especially carefully. As for Marlene's car, he threw it off a cliff into the river, but the police eventually failed to find the car or its fragments. Most likely, for more than 2 decades, the turbulent mountain river either carried the vehicle far downstream or completely destroyed it, literally grinding it against sharp rocks. A trial and a just verdict. Despite the new circumstances and the evidence found, there was still no probable cause to arrest Bill. Then the police decided to go for a trick and asked Bill's father to bring his son to a frank phone conversation so that he confessed to everything. The trick succeeded, and Major, learning that his daughter seeks to resume the investigation, said that she will not succeed because he has safely hidden all the fragments of his wife's body, her car, and got rid of the instrument of crime. It was these words of Bill that became the reason for his arrest, because he actually confessed to everything himself. In July 2001, the man was taken into custody. After listening to the recording of the telephone conversation, as well as learning about the identification of the skull, he confessed to what he had done. However, he blamed everything on his late wife, saying that she simply drove him to scandals, cheating, as well as threats to take his children and forbid him to see them. At the trial, Bill told his version of the story, saying that he and his wife had a fight in the car and she started threatening him with a gun, but he grabbed the gun from her and allegedly accidentally shot her twice in the head, except that the shots were fired into the back of her head at point-blank range, which looked like a premeditated crime, but not self-defense. Bill's trial did not begin until the summer of 2003, 23 years after his crime. At the hearing, the 59-year-old defendant was brought in a wheelchair. He himself behaved calmly and was confident that he would be able to avoid punishment. The lawyer hired by him insisted that this crime was the result of self-defense, and the stories of Lalana and Donald about harassment are not true. But despite the defense's best efforts, the court found Major guilty of the brutal, premeditated murder of Marlene Oaks. The man was sentenced to life in prison, which came as a complete surprise to him. In December 2016, Bill tried to apply for parole but was denied. A year later, he died in prison after suffering a second stroke. The Lissy family tragedy. What drove a devoted family man to the brink? How can one identify a psychopath? Let's delve into what this term encompasses. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by distinctive traits such as a lack of empathy and compassion, emotional shallowness, egocentrism, and a deceitful charm. While not an exhaustive list, these qualities are commonly observed in psychopaths. Such individuals are adept at adapting, skillfully manipulating those around them, and expertly concealing their true nature, often to the extent that even those closest to them may not recognize the potential danger. The Lissy family's story serves as a chilling reminder that someone perceived as a loving and close family member can suddenly morph into a remorseless perpetrator, sparing not even their own children. The man's behavior and his stated motives for committing such a heinous act were so alarming and shocking that they raised questions about his sanity. Yet, to everyone's astonishment, a psychiatric evaluation revealed that he was fully aware of his actions and had premeditated the horrific crime. This case shook Italy to its core, particularly the serene province of Mata Visconti, where this tragedy unfolded, marking it as the most notorious crime in the small Milanese suburb's history. Now let's methodically unravel this story and attempt to trace the sequence of events that led to such a tragic conclusion. The tragedy in Mata Visconti. In the early hours of Saturday, June 14, 2014, the quiet town of Mata Visconti was awakened by the desperate cries of a man. Peering out their windows, residents saw their neighbor, 31-year-old Carlo Lissy, calling for help. He appeared frightened and disoriented, mumbling incoherently and pleading for someone to call the police. As people from nearby homes gathered, Carlo revealed that his entire family had been victimized by intruders who had broken into their home, while he had miraculously survived because he was out with friends at a local sports bar, watching the soccer match between Italy and England. He mentioned that everything seemed normal when he left his house earlier that night, but upon returning, he found his home in disarray and the lifeless bodies of his 38-year-old wife, Christina, their 5-year-old daughter, and their 1.5-year-old son. Neighbors immediately called the police and emergency medical services. While waiting for them to arrive, the operator asked Carlo to check if any of his family members had a pulse and to possibly start CPR if there were any signs of life. To this, he screamed that he wouldn't step inside his house again or touch the bodies. While his behavior could be attributed to shock, it was peculiar that he referred to his family members as bodies even before confirming their demise. Carlo's odd behavior didn't stop there. When police and medical personnel arrived and confirmed the deaths of his wife and children, he barely reacted. He attempted to cry, but only managed contorted facial expressions, with his eyes remaining dry and his face almost indifferent. He struggled to recall the sequence of his actions, gave conflicting statements, but claimed to have recorded the moment he discovered the bodies on his phone's camera. He believed the recording would prove his innocence, but it turned out to be one of the main pieces of evidence against him, among many others. This was the beginning of a high-profile case that was quickly solved. The robbery narrative, strongly advocated by Lissy, was dismissed within hours of the investigation, and he became the prime suspect. As the police uncovered more physical evidence at the scene of the crime and interacted further with Carlo, doubts about his mental health began to emerge. Who was Christina Lissy? Let's start this narrative by introducing its main characters. Christina Lissy, born Christina Omas, came into the world on September 17, 1975, in the small northern Italian town of Pavia, becoming the eldest child in her family. From a young age, she exhibited a strong-willed, independent, and highly ambitious nature, always marching to the beat of her own drum. She possessed leadership qualities and was constantly striving to excel in whatever she undertook, whether it was her schoolwork, performances in the drama club, or any day-to-day activities. Christina was someone who always had a wide circle of friends, thanks to her excellent organizational skills and the ability to lead. After finishing high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Milan and soon moved out of her parents' home to start an independent life. Despite this, she maintained a close relationship with her family, staying in constant touch, and her parents knew they could always rely on their eldest daughter. At the age of 19, while still attending university, Christina took a job at a branch of a major Italian insurance company located in Mata Visconti. She quickly earned the respect of her superiors and colleagues, and her career was on a fast track to success. Upon graduation, she had a wide array of opportunities before her, but instead of moving to a big city, Olmos chose to stay closer to home in the countryside. By this time, she had already received a promotion at work and assumed a managerial position, becoming a leading specialist in the field of civil insurance. However, even as she grew into an adult and a successful woman, Christina never gave up her youthful passion for theater. She dedicated all her spare time to rehearsals and performing on stage, particularly enjoying musical productions due to her strong voice and impeccable musical ear. In Mata Visconti, she had her admirers and was sometimes even recognized on the streets. Yet Christina's personal life didn't seem to fall into place as smoothly. She had many suitors and occasional romances, but most of the men she encountered seemed frivolous, unreliable, and unsuitable for a serious relationship or family life. She held on to the belief that she would eventually find her true love and achieve happiness. Carlo Lissy, the unassuming psychopath. Carlo Lissy entered the world in the fall of 1982 in the Italian commune of Casarano as the eldest of two sons in his family. The family patriarch held conservative views, was quite strict, and even harsh with his children. Carlo's younger brother quickly became the parents' darling, constantly pampered and protected, while they demanded unquestioning obedience, stellar academic performance, and high achievements from their firstborn. From childhood, Carlo strived to meet his parents' expectations, always acting as instructed. He excelled academically, participated in volleyball, a sport his father chose for him despite Carlo's passion for soccer, and never argued with his father, who often stated that his house operated solely on his rules. It was easy to upset or anger their father, who became terrifying when enraged, so Carlo made it a point never to contradict him, always enviously observing his father's and mother's more affectionate treatment towards his younger brother. As a teenager, Carlo became nervous and withdrawn, dreaming of doing something on his own, yet fearing his father's wrath. His fears, internal struggles, and self-doubt affected his relationships with peers. Carlo had almost no friends at school, where he was seen as an uninteresting nerd, often openly bullied without the ability to defend himself, as his father had crushed his self-esteem and suppressed any desire to assert himself. Over time, Carlo learned to adapt and blend in. He avoided conflicts, tried to merge with the crowd, and was superficially polite and kind, even to those he despised. It seemed Carlo had lost his own emotions, or perhaps never had them, laughing or mourning with others, but his emotional responses always remained shallow because he never truly felt those emotions. Another trait of Carlo was his skill in dodging uncomfortable questions. He wasn't a pathological liar, but knew how to prevaricate and evade with such an impassive demeanor that it seemed he was speaking the truth. People who knew Carlo personally later recalled his diminished capacity for empathy. He could be described as callous and indifferent to the troubles and sorrows of others, including those close to him. After finishing school, Lissy enrolled in a prestigious university's economics faculty, chosen by his father, despite Carlo's disinterest in economics or working with numbers. But his opinion was never sought, and he couldn't challenge his father's decision. Thus, Carlo was accustomed to acting against his own interests, just to meet others' expectations. Carlo was quite handsome and knew how to use it to his advantage. His youthful sports activities and regular gym visits in adulthood made him even more attractive. Coupled with some charm and superficial charisma, Carlo could be described as a real looker with a dazzling smile and athletic build. People often admired his looks, leading to excessive self-love and clinical narcissism. Lissy easily initiated flings with women, but was incapable of engaging in serious, long-term relationships. First, he tried to avoid any responsibility. Second, he had no interest in making long-term plans, simply going with the flow. And third, his partner soon realized he was emotionally shallow and devoid of real attachment, leading them often to initiate the breakup. Even after university, the young man continued living with his parents, showing no desire to start an independent life, let alone a family of his own. Meanwhile, he secured a job at a leading IT company in Milan. Carlo earned a good salary and faced broad prospects, but remained dissatisfied with his career. However, his parents were overjoyed, and his father seemed proud of his eldest son for the first time, so Carlo was too afraid to disappoint him, preferring to avoid conflicts and criticism. But soon, a good job and career achievements weren't enough. His parents increasingly pressured him to marry and provide them with grandchildren. Aware of his numerous fleeting affairs and his inability to maintain serious relationships, these discussions often led to arguments at home. As Carlo always tried to avoid confrontations, he assured them he would soon find a wife and start a family. Carlo and Christina Lissy, a love story. Carlo first laid eyes on Christina during her performance in a musical play on stage, where he was utterly captivated by her powerful charisma and stunning vocal talent. Despite his immediate fascination, he lacked the courage to approach her after the show. However, fate intervened a few weeks later when mutual friends introduced them. At the time of their meeting, Carlo was only 23, while Christina had already turned 30. Despite the significant age difference, they quickly developed a romantic relationship. Christina, who had previously focused mainly on her career, found herself unexpectedly wanting to build a family and have children with Carlo. He was handsome, career-oriented, and intelligent. Christina perceived his hesitancy, dependency, noticeable selfishness, and some emotional coldness as traits that could be mended. She took the initiative in their relationship, with Carlo compliantly following her lead. Just a few months into the relationship, Omas introduced Carlo to her family. Christina's parents, however, were not pleased with her choice. They saw her suitor as frivolous, with Christina's mother describing him as a child in a man's body. She believed her daughter needed a more emotionally mature partner who could be a reliable support, not this immature young man. Christina, however, disagreed and decided to follow her heart, as she always had. Conversely, Carlo's parents were thrilled with his choice. Christina was seen as an adult, wise, self-sufficient, and accomplished woman who could take care of herself and their indecisive, somewhat irresponsible son. The head of the family, who was not easily pleased, was particularly delighted, convincing Carlo further that he had made the right decision. In quiet waters. About a year after meeting, the young couple moved in together and started actively planning their wedding. Carlo was quiet and compliant, always listening to his fiancée, never contradicting her, and carefully avoiding domestic disputes. Christina made all the decisions while her chosen partner silently supported them. This arrangement suited her perfectly. She was confident that a long and happy life awaited them. However, just before their wedding, Carlo revealed his true nature for the first time, nearly causing them to split. Before the wedding, Carlo's friends threw him a bachelor party in one of Milan's popular nightclubs. They drank, had fun, and were having a great time when a group of women joined them. One of them showed a keen interest in the groom-to-be, trying her best to seduce him. His inebriated friends immediately egged him on, suggesting that a fleeting affair with the stranger would be the perfect adventure to bid farewell to his bachelor life. Without much thought, the guy went off to a hotel with the woman where they spent a passionate night. The next morning, unexpectedly, Carlo confessed his love to the casual lover and promised to leave his fiancée for her. That same day, he confessed everything to Christina, stating he had fallen for someone else and no longer wanted the wedding. Christina handled the news with dignity, packed her belongings, and decided to move back to her parents' house temporarily while finding her own place. But when Carlo's father learned about his son's actions and that the engagement with Christina was broken off by his initiative, he was furious. He declared he didn't want to see his heir until he apologized to the bride-to-be and convinced her to marry him again. Once again, Carlo submitted to his father's will. After buying a huge bouquet of flowers, he headed to the Omas residence. Christina's parents opposed him. They had disliked this peculiar young man even before the news of his infidelity and the broken engagement, and now they certainly didn't want to see him. But the final decision was Christina's to make. After some thought, she decided to forgive her fiancé and give him another chance. The wedding and Mr. Lissy's double life. The wedding took place as planned, and the money gifted by relatives was invested in buying their own home in Mata Visconti. Initially, their marital life seemed quite blissful. Both held high-ranking positions with substantial salaries, affording them not just the necessities, but also travel, entertainment, and more. In 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Julia, and in 2013, Christina gave birth to a son, Gabriel. To the outside world, they appeared as a happy family, full of love and understanding. Carlo seemed to do everything to please his wife, not out of deep love or respect, but rather to avoid disputes. Christina was content with their life together, oblivious to the double life her husband led. At home, he was the exemplary family man, spending time with his wife and kids. Yet in Milan, where Carlo commuted daily for work, he transformed entirely. He frequently engaged in flings and casual encounters, meeting women in cafes, shopping centers, or even on the street. The handsome, stylishly dressed man in his expensive car almost always received reciprocated interest, but these affairs typically ended after a few dates. Carlo enjoyed the control and dominance in these short-term relationships, deciding when to see his next conquest and when to leave her. At home, Christina held the reins, with Carlo merely following her lead. However, rumors of his escapades eventually reached Christina. Each time she confronted him, Carlo swore it was all lies and slander. In 2013, shortly after the birth of their second child, Carlo seriously considered leaving his family for one of his mistresses, to the point of admitting his intentions to his wife. Christina countered with compelling arguments against their separation, particularly highlighting how it would upset his parents. Carlo had no choice but to concede to her reasoning, new love, and a horrific plan to escape marital ties. A year later, in early 2014, a new employee named Maria, young and attractive, joined Carlo's workplace. He fell for her instantly, unable to think of anyone else. He tried everything to catch her attention, giving small gifts, complimenting her, and asking her out repeatedly. However, Maria was clear about not wanting to engage with a married co-worker who had 2 children, but Carlo, persistent in his pursuit, seemed to ignore her protests and didn't think of giving up. Moreover, Carlo began to blame his family for his unhappiness, believing his wife and children were obstacles to his personal joy. He convinced himself he had never been happy in his marriage, or in life for that matter. But with Maria, he imagined he could have the perfect relationship. If only he wasn't bound by his marital ties and responsibilities as a father. The more he dwelled on this thought, the darker his contemplations became. Carlo broached the subject of divorce again, but his wife once more convinced him it was a bad idea, and he found no arguments to counter hers. Frustrated, he started looking online for divorce lawyers, but realized after a few consultations that he would have to surrender half of his assets to Christina and also pay child support. Unwilling to accept such an outcome, he began researching how to end a person's life quickly and without arousing suspicion. Delving into various criminal stories, Carlo stumbled upon an article about an armed robbery that had occurred a few years prior in Mata Visconti. The robbers had fatally stabbed the homeowner before fleeing with the loot, remaining undetected to this day. A monstrous plan took shape in Carlo's mind to recreate a similar robbery scenario, but this time the intended victims would be the mother and children. The last day of the Lissy family. The last day for Christina and the children was Friday, June 13th, 2014. Carlo had the day off and spent it with his family, giving them a farewell party, so to speak. They went to an amusement park together, then went to the mall for shopping, and spent the evening at a popular local cafe. The man did his best to make sure that as many people as possible saw him and his family that day, and everyone noticed how happy they were. After returning home, the couple put the children to bed in their rooms on the second floor and went downstairs to the living room where they made love. It was part of Carlo's cunning plan to avert suspicion. He knew that the examination would establish the fact that he and Christina had consensual intimacy, and who would think that after that a man would suddenly take the life of his wife and children? The woman knew that her husband was going to watch soccer with friends and assumed that he went to get dressed, and she herself settled down in the living room at the TV. But Carlo at that time went to the kitchen, where he took a large knife and stealthily crept up to his wife from behind. He stabbed her in the side of the neck, but Christina not only remained conscious, but also rushed to escape. Apparently, she did not immediately realize who had attacked her, and when she turned around and saw her distraught husband with a knife in his hand, she was shocked. The victim tried to defend herself and dislodged the knife, causing the man's hand to slip and injuring his palm. Despite her efforts, the strength disparity was too great. Carlo continued his assault until Christina showed no signs of life. She died without understanding why her loved one could commit such a horrific act. Then, Carlo went upstairs and cut the throats of his sleeping 5-year-old daughter and his 18-month-old son. Experts later concluded that the children likely did not suffer and probably didn't even wake up. Neighbors, some of whom heard loud screams, did not call the police, thinking the noise quickly subsided. Had they been more vigilant, the children's lives might have been saved. After completing the deed, Carlo clumsily staged a robbery, slightly moving and scattering items, erased his fingerprints from the weapon, cleaned the floor where he had stepped in fresh blood, and then went to a rarely used basement shower to wash off the blood. However, he inexplicably put back on the same underwear, which had small blood splatters unnoticed by him in the moment of the attack. Following this, the perpetrator bandaged his cut hand, dressed up, and casually went to a sports bar to watch football and drink beer with friends. He behaved naturally, and his friends, later testifying in court, could not fathom that he had just committed a triple homicide against his own family. Towards the end of the match, Carlo sent a couple of messages to his wife's phone, updating her on the score and professing his love, adding that he would be home soon. He returned around 3 a.m. and staged a dramatic discovery of the crime, making several critical mistakes. Firstly, he recorded the scene on his phone's camera, intending to create an alibi by pretending to discover the disorder and then the body of his wife, before running outside in panic. His second mistake was failing to turn off the camera, resulting in footage that completely contradicted his alibi and testimony, investigation, and evidence. Carlo's initial claim of a robbery was quickly dismissed in the early hours of the investigation, following the crime scene examination. Doors and windows were intact, indicating that the perpetrator had unrestricted access to the house. Nothing of value, nor anything at all, was missing despite money and Christina's jewelry box being in plain sight. The disorder appeared staged, with items merely toppled or displaced rather than searched through. Most importantly, there was no logical reason for robbers to harm the children sleeping upstairs in their beds. Thus, the case was swiftly reclassified as a deliberate act of ending lives. Carlo, becoming the prime suspect immediately, gave inconsistent statements and couldn't clearly explain the fresh cut on his palm. When he was taken into custody and his clothing was sent for analysis, experts quickly found tiny blood splatters on them. However, Carlo claimed the blood must have come from when he attempted to revive his family members, yet the stains were too small and located on the back of his clothing, suggesting they could only have originated from the knife's motion during the act. Regarding the video Carlo provided to the authorities, it clearly showed that he didn't approach his wife's body to check for a pulse or go upstairs to the children, but ran outside immediately and didn't return. Despite this, he claimed his family was no longer alive and knew for certain all three were ended with a knife. The discovery of a bloodied cloth in the trash, which the culprit used to clean up, was the final piece of damning evidence. A psychopath, but is he sane? After the man was arrested, all his attempts to feign grief ceased. He became calm and unconcerned, and once in his cell, he simply went to sleep. Carlo felt no guilt or remorse, no pity for his own children or his wife, but he continued to insist on his own innocence, despite the fact that all the evidence was against him. A search history had been reconstructed on the killer's seized laptop, giving the investigation an insight into exactly when Lissy began planning to kill his family. There was now no doubt that it was a premeditated crime, but as yet the motive remained unclear. When the man realized that there was no point in denying, he began to confess, telling how exactly he got rid of his loved ones. But the answer to the main question shocked everyone. Explaining the motives for his action, he said that he could not just divorce Christine, because then they would have to share a lot of jointly acquired property, including the house, cars, and the family bank account. And he was not satisfied with this. In addition, there would be a burden in the form of 2 children who would have to pay child support. And all this, according to Carlo, would interfere with their happy life with Maria, for which, in fact, he decided to commit a crime. About all this, the murderer spoke quite calmly and indifferently. That he is a psychopath, no one has no doubt, but it was unclear whether this man is sane. The psychiatric examination established that Lissy was aware of his actions and fully realized what he was doing, but he did not feel any remorse either at the time of the crime or afterwards. In January 2015, Carlo was sentenced to life in prison. He listened to the judge's verdict indifferently, noting only that he thought so. Sometime later, the man tried to file an appeal, but soon withdrew it himself, saying that it was all useless. Finally, Lissy's father died of a heart attack shortly after his son was convicted and sent to prison. He simply could not accept the fact that he had raised a real monster, devoid of a sense of pity and remorse. The tragic story of a young school teacher named Lacy Peterson not only shocked the public with its unimaginable cruelty and inhumanity, but also served as a precedent for the adoption of a law of the same name, known as the Lacy and Connor Act. Connor was the name of her unborn son, who died with his mother, and the law itself was designed to protect children from violence before they were born, and to punish those who infringe on their lives and health. The case itself is far from unique, but the fact that a pregnant woman was abused by a close person who was supposed to protect and care for her is shocking and bewildering. Several TV documentaries have been made about the case. Despite the circumstantial evidence and controversial evidence, no one doubted the guilt of the defendant, and he himself, with all his appearance, demonstrated that he is not sorry and does not repent for what he did. This story is one of those that causes chills all over the body, but let's try to understand how it happened that the guy, who was considered a model family man, suddenly decided to commit such an atrocity. Who was Lacy Peterson? Lacy Denise Peterson, maiden name Rocha, was born in May 1975 in a small town of Modesto, located in the central part of the state of California. Her parents, Dennis Rocha and Sharon Anderson, were acquainted since high school. Their teenage romance led to marriage and the birth of 2 children, eldest son Brandon and daughter Lacey. Curiously, the mother named her daughter after a local beauty queen whom she herself admired. The family owned their own farm, so the children from a young age were accustomed to working in the field, as well as taking care of animals. The girl was very close to her mother. Together they grew a wonderful garden with flowers and fruit trees. Then Lacey first thought about connecting her future life with this occupation and getting a specialized profession. When the children were still small, the family faced a crisis. No matter how hard the spouses tried, but they could not save the marriage, and soon they officially divorced. The children, by mutual consent, remained to live with their mother in their hometown. 2 years later, Sharon remarried. Her chosen one was a friend of her youth named Ron Gransky. Ron treated his wife's children as his own, and in fact replaced their birth father, who after the divorce was not too interested in the life of the heirs. The girl even began to call him Daddy, and a couple of years later the couple had a common daughter who was named Emily. Lacey grew up a kind, sociable, and open girl. She always had a lot of friends. She studied well in school and was also a member of the cheerleading team. After receiving a high school education, the dark-haired beauty successfully passed exams and entered the prestigious California State University. She did not forget about her childhood dream and decided to become a landscape designer. Lacey has always been a creative person, good at drawing, so she found the chosen profession ideal for herself. Who is Scott Peterson? Scott Lee Peterson is also a native of California, only he was born in the large metropolis of San Diego, in the southwest of the state, in 1972, October 24th, in the family of Jacqueline Helena Leatham and Arthur Lee Peterson. The boy grew up in a fairly well-to-do family, and from an early age did not know anything to refuse. His father had his own business associated with the production of packaging materials, and his mother owned a store of designer clothes. By the way, her boutique was located in Hollywood, so among the regular customers were many celebrities. Scott, in childhood, began to show his difficult character, liked to be in the center of attention, did not tolerate bans or refusals, and in school about him, spoke as a spoiled, capricious, and even arrogant child. From a young age, the boy played golf and even thought about a professional career in this sport. In his school years, he was friends with Philip Nicholson, nicknamed Lefty, the future professional golfer, who in 2012 was ranked second in the world rankings. As a teenager, Scott himself was among the best athletes in San Diego. After graduation, the young man became a student at one of the universities of the state of Arizona, where he, as a promising athlete, paid half of the cost of education. However, Peterson could not get a diploma because he was expelled for inappropriate behavior after a raucous party, drinking strong alcohol in the company of other students. After several months of reflection and searching for a suitable place, the young man applied to the University of California, where he first planned to study economics, but later changed his mind and transferred to the Faculty of Agriculture. By the way, this time Scott very seriously and responsibly approached the educational process, becoming an exemplary student, because his parents threatened to leave their son without a livelihood if he was once again expelled. Scott and Lacey, a love story. Young people met during the period of study at the university. Scott at that time began to work part-time in one of the local coffee shops, where there also worked as a waitress former classmate and close friend of Lacey. Lacey often stopped by to grab a bite to eat and see her friend, and at some point, she noticed the handsome young man. Scott also noticed the smiling petite brunette and began to pay her every possible attention. One day, when Lacey came to the coffee shop but didn't see her friend there, she decided to ask Scott what was wrong. They quickly got to talking, but since Scott had to work, Lacey wrote her phone number on a napkin so they could get in touch later. Scott called her back that evening, and an excited Lacey, immediately after talking to him, told her mother that she had been in touch with her future husband. A couple days later, he asked his new acquaintance out on a first date, and Lacey readily accepted. It's worth noting that Peterson had another passion besides golf, fishing, and he decided to invite Lacey to go deep-sea fishing in an open body of water. She accepted the offer, but she got seasick in the boat, so the couple had to quickly return to the shore. Family life. Nevertheless, after that not quite successful first date, the couple began to meet, and a couple of years later, they decided to start living together. Scott, by that time, finally abandoned his dreams of a professional career in sports and decided to start his own small business, and with the startup capital, he helped his parents. In the summer of 1997, after Lacey received her diploma, the lovers played a modest wedding in the traditional style, with a white dress, veil, and vows at the altar. They invited only family members and a few close friends to the celebration, and as a venue, they chose the popular Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort, located on the ocean in the western part of the state of California. After the wedding, the couple settled in the small resort town of San Luis Obispo, located between Los Angeles and San Francisco. There they decided to open their own sports bar, but the idea was doomed from the start. There were rumors that Scott's parents again helped with the implementation of the business plan, but they themselves later denied it, saying that their son was a poor businessman, and they realized this while he was still studying at the university. Anyway, the business of the couple really did not go very well at first. They constantly had problems, then with the institution itself, then with the management, but gradually they managed to spin. The number of visitors over time increased, and in 2000, when the Petersons decided to sell the institution, it was already considered a fairly well-known and popular place. The couple decided to move to their hometown of Lissy to put down roots and have children. There they bought a small, cozy house in a good neighborhood, bought a car, got a dog, and about a year later, the young woman told her husband the happy news. Soon they will become parents. By that time, Lacy had decided to change her occupation and got a job at a local school as an art teacher. Her husband was having a harder time finding a job and was forced to take a job with a fertilizer and organic fertilizer company. Lacy tried to be an impeccable wife, to create comfort and peace in her and her husband's new home. She kept everything in perfect order, enjoyed cooking, loved to host guests, and had a beautiful flower garden on the lawn. Scott seemed to support his wife in everything, and from the outside they looked like a perfect couple. The news of the upcoming addition to the family he also accepted with joy, and when the couple learned that they will have a boy, they actively began to choose a name for him. The future parents decided to name their son Connor, and everyone was sure that they were looking forward to the arrival of the child into the world. Disappearance of a pregnant teacher. On December 24, 2002, Lacy, who was 8 months pregnant, mysteriously disappeared. The first alarms were raised by Lacy's mother and stepfather, who had been unable to contact her all day. She didn't answer the phone, nor did she return calls, which was unusual for her. As it turned out, the husband was also unaware of his wife's whereabouts. The day before, she had visited her parents and also visited the beauty salon where her sister Amelia worked. She was in good spirits, preparing for Christmas and New Year's Eve celebrations. In the morning, Lacy allegedly went for a walk with the dog, but a couple of hours later, neighbors found the Petersons' dog wandering down the street with a dirty leash dragging behind him. At the time, no one even suspected anything wrong. The neighbor, he said, simply thought the dog had escaped, so he took him to the backyard of the owner's residence. Toward evening, the worried parents called the police and reported him missing, asking them to start searching immediately because Lacy was pregnant, and if she was in trouble, she needed help as soon as possible. But neither that day nor the next, she was never found. A day later, news of the local teacher's disappearance spread throughout the town, and hundreds of volunteers joined the search for her. People combed the area, pasted flyers with portraits of the girl, as well as organized search pages in social networks, where they posted detailed information with the signs of the missing. Mom, stepfather, older brother, and younger sister appealed to all concerned on television with a request to help in the search and share any useful information, for which a reward was even announced, except that Scott behaved somewhat strangely and even suspiciously. He did not take part in press conferences, was not too interested in the results of the search, and did not look particularly concerned. According to the investigator who handled the case, Mr. Peterson's behavior made him suspicious from the start. He was frighteningly calm, and the police officer's questions irritated him. He himself asked no questions, behaved arrogantly, and most interestingly, confused his statements, changing them repeatedly. Scott was the last person to see his spouse on the day of her disappearance. According to him, he went to the golf course in the morning to get some exercise and play, while his wife stayed home and planned to walk the dog and do some cleaning afterward. When he returned home, he found the dog in the backyard, but Lacy was nowhere to be found. Scott did not go to the police because he thought that his wife was visiting her parents. But later, when she still did not show up, He got worried and called his mother-in-law's house, where he was told that Lacey did not come to them. And that's where the first inconsistencies in Scott's testimony came to light. First, no one could confirm his alibi, as he had not been seen on the golf course. Second, the father-in-law claimed, and this was later confirmed by the taped conversations, that he had called Scott himself when he was looking for his stepdaughter, but he replied that he had no idea where she might be. Peterson then quickly changed tactics and stated that he had changed his mind about playing golf, deciding instead to go fishing at a secluded spot in Berkeley Harbor. He attributed the confusion over the phone calls to the fact that all the relatives were on edge and couldn't remember who had called whom or when. During the inspection of the couple's home, a rather strange and frightening detail was discovered: the missing Lacey's purse, which contained her house keys, phone, and some cash. These are things that she certainly wouldn't have left the house without, even going for a walk to the nearest park with her dog. How would she lock the front door? This nuance was alarming and raised suspicions that Lacey hadn't disappeared somewhere on the street, but had vanished from her own home. A grisly discovery. On April 13th, almost 4 months after the pregnant teacher's disappearance, local fishermen noticed something strange on the rocky shores of San Francisco Bay and decided to go closer to examine their find. As it turned out, their attention was drawn to the body of an infant that had been washed ashore. The boy's body had hardly undergone decomposition, but it was badly disfigured, apparently due to the fact that the body had been battered by the waves against the rocks for a long time. His umbilical cord was not cut, but as if torn off. A day later, in another part of the bay, a few kilometers from where the infant was found, the badly decomposed body of a young woman was found. The corpse was so disfigured that it was not immediately recognizable as human remains. But the most gruesome thing was that the body was missing its head and most of each of its limbs. There were only a few fragments of clothing left on the body, including a special maternity bra. It was simply impossible to identify the body, so it was possible to establish that it belonged to the missing teacher only through DNA examination. According to criminalists, the baby was well preserved only because all this time he was in the womb, but in the process of decomposition, the body rejected the fetus. According to eyewitnesses who found the boy, something strange resembling a ribbon or rope was draped around his neck, and there was a large cut on his body. Although the results of the autopsy were never officially published, the experts claimed that the cut was the result of a wave hitting the body against a sharp rock, and that the noose around his neck was just trash. Throughout the investigation and search, Scott remained at large. Moreover, Lacey's parents actively defended their son-in-law for the first few days, calling him an ideal husband and their union a happy one, built on love and trust. But the more the police learned about this guy, the more suspicious he seemed to them. So soon it turned out that Peterson constantly cheated on his wife, and his first extramarital affair occurred almost immediately after the wedding, even before the couple moved to Modesto. Later, he had many more mistresses, to whom he lied about not being married or recently widowed. Thus, in the fall of 2002, Scott met on a blind date with a charming blonde named Amber Frey. The girl worked as a masseuse and raised a young daughter on her own. She was looking for a life partner who would love and accept her along with her child, and handsome, polite Scott she immediately liked. The feelings were mutual. Scott admitted almost immediately that he had recently been widowed, and the coming Christmas would be the first one he would spend without his beloved deceased wife. Amber consoled him as best she could, and from that day forward, they began communicating almost daily. Soon, Scott informed his mistress that they could move in together after the holidays, and the couple began planning a future together. True, Scott noted that he never wanted to have children of his own, and seriously intends to undergo a sterilization procedure, vasectomy, but at the same time, he was ready to raise daughter Amber as his own. All was well until Amber accidentally saw a TV report about the disappearance of a local pregnant teacher. Despite the fact that the husband of the missing woman did not give interviews and did not appear in front of the camera lenses, the broadcast showed pictures of her and Lacey together, in which Amber recognized her lover. Another curious feature was the fact that Scott, soon after the disappearance of his wife, radically changed his image, growing a beard and bleaching his naturally dark hair on his head and face. At first, Amber could not believe her eyes and hoped that she imagined it, but soon she was convinced that she was dating the same guy. She immediately went to the police and told them everything, even agreeing to record their phone conversations. During one of their conversations, Amber wondered why Scott had told her he was a widower a couple weeks before his wife disappeared, but he must have sensed something was wrong, but he was evasive. As soon as the bodies of the dead mother and child were discovered, the question of immediately arresting Scott as the prime suspect arose. Despite the fact that the investigation had no hard evidence, there was a high probability that Scott would try to leave the country. In fact, that's exactly what he was going to do. But fortunately, he didn't have time. The widower was taken into custody on April 18, 2003, but he categorically refused to admit his guilt. At the same time, his house, garage, and car were searched in detail, with frightening results. Microparticles of Lacy's dried blood were found on tools in the garage, and in the trunk of the car and at the bottom of the fishing boat, experts found several hairs of the dead woman. The clothes Scott was wearing on that fateful day were long since gotten rid of. The house had undergone several general cleanings with the help of cleaning services, and the building itself had already been put up for sale. But the most difficult part of the investigation was the inability to establish the exact date of Lacy's death, which in turn made it impossible to verify the suspect's alibi. The investigation was also hampered by traces of cement found in the garage, in the trunk, and in Peterson's boat. The material was believed to be the basis for a homemade anchor, with which he wanted to dispose of the body so that it would never be found. Although there was no direct evidence against Scott, he was found guilty of 2 counts of first and second-degree murder. Despite the vigorous and rather confident defense of the lawyers, almost no one had any doubts that Scott was guilty. The main proof of this was his behavior. He was not excited or upset. He took no part in the search. He was in a hurry to get rid of the evidence, put his wife's house and car for sale almost immediately after her disappearance, changed his image, and was going to leave the country with his mistress. Investigator Jonathan Buehler, who had been on the case since Lacy's disappearance, said in court that he had no doubts about Peterson's guilt from the start. He realized this after his first conversation with him. The court initially imposed the death penalty as a punishment, but after a series of appeals filed with enviable regularity, the sentence was changed in 2021 to life imprisonment without the right to ever expect to be released. Also, the amount of the insurance, in the amount of $250,000 for the life of Lacy, which was originally assigned in favor of Scott, the court redirected the mother of the deceased. This high-profile case horrified the public and raised the issue of the need to protect unborn children from violence who may become victims of similar crimes. Thus, in the spring of 2004, the Lacy Encounter Act was passed, with the parents and sister of the deceased woman present at the signing. 3 years after the tragedy, Sharon Rocha published a biographical book dedicated to her daughter and grandson titled In Memory of Lacy, A Mother's Story of Love, Loss, and Justice. All money raised from the sale of the publication was donated to charity. The book itself was among the top bestsellers in American nonfiction. Sharon's husband and stepfather Lacy passed away in the spring of 2018 from a heart attack, shortly before another court hearing. He was buried next to his beloved stepdaughter and grandson. By the way, Lacy's own father passed away in December of that same year. The case of Paula Ortega. In early 2023, the city of Sangolquí in Ecuador's Pichincha region was rocked by a tragic incident. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the community, but its motive, a mere $600 theft. Could the life of 37-year-old Paula Ortega Alcocer really be valued at just $600? Born in March 1986, Paula was the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figueroa Lara School and later attended the Polytechnic University, where she developed a keen interest in the hospitality industry. After her studies, Paula actively contributed to the growth of her family's business, which specialized in party goods manufacturing. The Ortega Alcocer family was well-to-do and renowned in Sangolquí and neighboring Ecuadorian towns. Paula's father, in his youth, began building a business supplying party goods across Ecuador. The venture became quite successful, enabling him to start his own production of balloons, piñatas, and other festive paraphernalia. This expansion led to the opening of several stores. The Alcocer family's party shops were located not only in Sangolquí, but also in Ecuador's capital, Quito. Each family member played a role in the development and maintenance of their enterprise. The father expanded the main production line, opening new workshops for balloons, garlands, caps, and various party items. Each of the 3 children managed a store, tailoring it to their vision. Paula's entrepreneurial spirit led her beyond just managing a store. She organized a party planning service within the company, which turned out to be a great success. It seemed Paula had found her calling, bringing joy to people, which made her truly happy. While the business ventures of the Ortega family flourished for a long time, unfortunately, Paula Ortega's personal life was not as successful. Despite her youthful and joyous demeanor, she faced significant hardships in her private life. Paula's first marriage to Carlos Pedro turned out to be unhappy. After the birth of their daughter, Carlos developed an alcohol addiction. He began disappearing from home and stealing money from Paula's store. His infidelity was the last straw, leading Paula to end the marriage and find herself alone with her daughter. This period was particularly challenging for Paula, as she lost hope in finding personal happiness. However, the psychological support of her family and her passion for her work helped her regain a sense of normalcy in her life. A decade later, Paula met Christian Diego. A tall, dark-haired, and handsome man, Christian was 4 years younger than Paula. Having lost faith in finding a worthy partner, Paula was cautious with the persistent young suitor. Christian proved to be calm and reliable, quickly bonding with Paula's daughter, which greatly impressed Paula. After 2 years of relationship, her heart warmed to him, leading to a beautiful wedding ceremony. Christian embraced Paula's daughter as his own, and they soon welcomed another daughter, Maria. Christian and Paula spent 5 years together, with Christian fully integrating into Paula's father's company. He was entrusted with finding locations for new stores, which often kept him away from home. Coming from a modest working-class family, Christian had always dreamed of owning a large business. Unfortunately, some people can conceal their dark sides so well that one might live for years alongside ruthless criminals without suspecting a thing. However, the truth eventually comes to light when evil erupts in the most unexpected ways. Paula Ortega and her husband, Christian, appeared to be the epitome of a happy, successful couple to their family, friends, and neighbors. However, this perception was only surface deep. In 2000, Paula's father passed away after a long illness. His death not only devastated the family, but also turned their business upside down. Christian, driven by a desire for power and the wealth it brought, eagerly sought to take Paula's father's place in the business. However, his lack of skill led to one failed deal after another. As a result, Christian began to vent his frustration on his family. Initially in secret, but later openly, he began to abandon his family, indulging in a life of debauchery. Women and alcohol became his escape into a world of pleasure and recklessness. With Paula's father no longer there to restrain him, Christian's true nature began to surface. Having already experienced a traumatic marriage, Paula refused to endure this behavior again. The couple's home became a battleground of endless scandals, revealing Christian's true nature as an ambitious egotist, craving only power and unquestioned obedience. After a particularly nasty argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce, fearing her husband's reaction. The news of this drastically changed Christian's behavior. Unwilling to lose his place in the successful family, he stopped his outrageous conduct and appeared to transform for the better. He expressed remorse, claiming to be caught up in a whirlwind of confusion, and professed his love and value for his family. His eloquence persuaded Paula. Not wanting to be alone again, she gave him a second chance. In a gesture of reconciliation, Christian suggested organizing a romantic dinner at their home. Paula agreed. She sent their daughters to her parents' house and began preparing for the evening. Inside, she was aflutter with excitement. Deep down, she still dreamed of a happy, strong family and was doing everything she could to preserve it. The evening at the Ortega home was one of celebration and comfort. The living room was lit up with festive garlands, and the dining table was warmly illuminated by the yellow glow of candles. Christian uncorked a bottle of dry white wine while Paula served a hot meal. The night could have been genuinely reconciliatory, had it not been for a sudden proposal from Christian that disrupted the peace. Christian, a co-owner of the Alcozar company, revealed to his wife a significant misstep. In his pursuit to replace Paula's father and gain full control, he had made a costly mistake in an important tender, leading to substantial losses for the company. Now, the firm desperately needed a new investor, implying that a part of the company would officially change hands. Paula was adamantly against this, believing her father's business should remain a family affair. Despite Christian's persuasion, she stood her ground, infuriating him. He had already found an investor and was eager to complete the deal without complications. Their dinner, and by extension their relationship, soured. January 2nd, 2023, seemed like any other day. Paula took her younger daughter to the playroom before heading to her shop for work. She had a large order to prepare, involving assembling balloon fountains and party decorations for a themed event. During her lunch break, 2 men knocked on the shop's door. Although closed, Paula opened it, expecting a courier to pick up the balloon bouquets. The men, slim and dressed identically as if they were twins, startled her with their dark hoodies. They lingered, scanning the shop before splitting up. As Paula called out to them, stating the shop was closed for lunch, they cornered her against the wall. The tension of this silent scene was broken by a knock on the glass door. The men hastily exited the shop. A smiling young courier arrived, unwittingly rescuing Paula from the unknown assailants. Shaken, Paula handed over the package, closed the shop, and with trembling hands, called her mother. She was visibly frightened, a sentiment she expressed over the phone. Paula's mother suggested reporting the unsettling incident at her shop to the police, but Paula declined, attributing her reaction to mere fright since nothing harmful had actually occurred. She didn't reopen her shop that day, her thoughts consumed by Christian's actions and the identity and motives of the 2 mysterious men. Seeking solace, Paula decided to take a stroll through the city. She stopped at a nearby cafe for some coffee, walked through the park to breathe in the fresh air, and then visited her sister. Over cups of fragrant tea, they engaged in a heart-to-heart conversation. Overwhelmed by the day's shocking events, Paula confided in her sister not only about the scary encounter at her shop, but also about the difficulties in her marriage. She shared how Christian had drastically changed after her father's passing, indulging in alcohol and openly being unfaithful. Paula chose not to mention his proposal about merging the company with a new investor, as she habitually kept her personal struggles to herself. But that day, her emotions overpowered her pride and shame over tolerating such demeaning treatment. He's a peculiar being. My sister was lively, happy, cheerful, enterprising, hardworking, an extremely gentle and kind mother. She should have been receiving energy from him, Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, would later say. Paula spoke of her long-term life plans, her desire for her daughters to grow up and become professionals, and her intention to continue her business. She was selfless and tirelessly hardworking, Adriana recalled. After her emotional talk with her sister, Paula headed home. A phone call from Christian interrupted her. He was picking up their daughter from the playroom and would come to the shop to pick her up as well. His hurried speech was interspersed with children's voices. Paula didn't get a chance to tell him about the frightening incident at her shop, especially since she suspected him to be involved. Reluctantly, Paula returned to work, once again prioritizing her family's well-being over her own. She didn't have to wait long. Christian arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had wanted to go home, and he couldn't deny his little princess. He informed Paula that the girls were at home and eagerly waiting for hamburgers for dinner. In what has become a modern family tradition, Christian took Paula not to the nearest fast food joint, but to a restaurant courtyard at a shopping center, several blocks from their home. Parking the car beside a secluded wall and locking it securely, he left Paula inside to collect their order. Relaxing in the passenger seat after a taxing day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the impending danger. Shortly, she recognized 2 familiar figures near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. Recognizing them as the unexpected visitors from her shop, Paula tried to stay calm, trusting that the car was secure and Christian would return soon. Suddenly, the car's lights flashed and the door locks disengaged. In a panic, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms, but she was trapped with no escape. One intruder casually got into the driver's seat while the other joined him in the back, pinning Paula down even more. She felt something warm trickling down her arm before darkness enveloped her. Paula sustained 11 knife wounds to her neck and 2 to her face. After the brutal attack, the assailants fled the scene, leaving Paula alone and gravely injured. Christian returned just 7 minutes later to a horrific sight. The car's interior was drenched in blood. Frantically, he called emergency services, but struggled to clearly communicate the situation and give emergency coordinates. He then called Paula's mother to report the attack before driving to the hospital himself. Tragically, Paula succumbed to her injuries in the emergency room, passing away before receiving necessary medical attention. Christian, overwhelmed by grief and shock at the loss of his wife, reacted with loud cries and throwing chairs in the waiting room. The sudden violent end of Paula Ortega left a community in shock and a family in profound grief, raising questions about the motive and identity of the attackers. The initial theory of the prosecution was a violent end inflicted during a robbery. It was later discovered that $600 and a gold necklace were missing from Paula's purse. This began an investigation. The prosecution's theory was confirmed when footage from city cameras showed 2 unknown men who had visited Paula's store earlier that day in the vicinity. Both were in hoodies, making it impossible to create a clear image of their faces, and their vague descriptions provided no clarity. 2 months after the tragic event, Paula's family demanded justice, but the investigation was at a standstill. A turning point came when Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, gave testimony casting doubt on Christian's innocence. She informed the investigators about a conversation she had with Paula on the day of the incident. Adriana also mentioned that Christian regularly committed infidelity and domestic violence against Paula, who was contemplating divorce. This provided a perfect motive, as Christian, driven by ambition, could not afford to lose his wealth and status in the event of a divorce. The prosecution investigated this angle. During a search of their home, incriminating messages were found on Christian's phone, indicating multiple affairs and turbulent marital relations. A critical piece of evidence was documentation prepared for the transfer of the company to a private individual, which Paula had refused to sign. Following these revelations, the incident was investigated as a suspected homicide, as the prosecution continued to gather information implicating Christian Diego. New evidence emerged, unraveling the complex web of the couple's relationship. 2 weeks after the incident, we found out he transferred $2,000 to an unknown woman's account, said Adriana, Paula's sister, adding another layer of suspicion to the already convoluted case. The most shocking aspect, as claimed by relatives, was that Christian made a payment using Paula's account while she was dying from her injuries. Instead of immediately helping his gravely wounded wife, Christian seemingly bided his time. Investigations confirmed this information. The identity of the woman who received the transfer from Christian that day was established as 28-year-old Laura Castillo. Urgently summoned for questioning, she revealed that she had noticed her bank card missing a couple of days earlier, but didn't think much of it, as her brother often used her card. The electronic payment records showed a transfer of $2,000 from Christian on January 2nd at 20:05. However, Laura denied any acquaintance with Christian. Her solid alibi at the time of the incident absolved her of any involvement. She was released, and the investigation hit a dead end again. Days later, Laura returned to the police, stating her brother had returned the bank card, as she had suspected. She provided a full description of her brother's appearance, which matched one of the criminals caught on surveillance cameras near the car. In the chaos of fleeing the crime scene, one attacker forgot to pull up his hood. The identities of Byron and Mortines Castillo, 2 repeat offenders with a substantial criminal history, were established. The brothers were apprehended. But what could possibly link 2 seasoned criminals to a seemingly respectable and successful family man? Further investigation revealed that the attacks on Paula had been carried out repeatedly by the Castillo brothers. But why were these repeat offenders targeting this young woman? On December 8, 2022, Paula Ortega faced a harrowing incident at a gas station when her car was stolen. Distracted by a young man, his accomplice quickly jumped behind the wheel and sped off. Fortunately, her daughters weren't in the car that day. Surveillance footage identified the two familiar culprits. Coincidentally, on the day of the theft, Paula unknowingly came face to face with her future assailant. However, the car theft case took an unexpected turn when Christian intervened, claiming the thieves had contacted him. He met with them and retrieved all of Paula's personal belongings, including her wallet. This development cast further doubt on Christian's innocence. Seasoned investigators were puzzled by the widower's boldness in shielding the criminals. Surveillance cameras played a crucial role in identifying the carjackers. As Christian realized he was under suspicion, he concocted a new defense narrative involving extortion by two criminal brothers demanding a large sum of money. But before he could deploy his version of events, the police executed a swift interrogation strategy. Separating the suspects and suggesting one had confessed, they obtained a confession from Martin Castillo. He admitted that more than 2 months earlier, Christian had paid them $2,000 to murder his wife, promising another $2,000 after the deed. During a reenactment, Martin demonstrated how he inflicted 11 fatal knife wounds on the terrified woman. Realizing the crime was uncovered, he remorselessly divulged all details of their arrangement with Christian. Martin revealed that the car theft and the attack on Paula's shop were also parts of Christian's plan to pressure her. By chance, Paula lived a few hours longer than intended. On November 29, 2023, all 3 suspects appeared in court. The prosecution presented a comprehensive picture of the murder day, pieced together from various sources. Videos from surveillance cameras in the area where Christian parked the car, subjected to audio and video forensic analysis, unveiled a chilling, soul-freezing narrative. In chilling surveillance footage, Christian Diego is seen exiting his car and heading towards a shopping center elevator. Moments later, he remotely unlocks his car from half a block away, allowing 2 assailants to enter the vehicle and attack Paula. The prosecutor's report noted Christian's odd behavior post-attack, repeatedly looking back, approaching the car, pausing, returning, pacing back and forth, and making phone calls. Surprisingly, upon finding his wife bleeding profusely, he showed no shock or urgency to help her, instead driving her to a distant hospital. Christian's actions, meticulously reconstructed from surveillance videos, particularly in the first 4 minutes after Paula's attack, were cold and calculating. As she bled in the car but was still alive, Christian, standing nearby, callously transferred money to his accomplices for the assault. Paula's family lawyers urged the court to consider these videos as aggravating factors in the crime. The reconstructed sequence of events presented in court proves the crime was premeditated. Hours before the attack, around 1:30 p.m., 2 individuals entered Paula's store, dropped off nearby by Christian. This implies the crime was intended to occur earlier, during the lunchtime closure, when Paula was alone. Prosecutor Marlon Calderon highlighted inconsistencies. How did the assailants know the couple would be at the eatery if they weren't tailing them? Yet they arrived on time to commit the crime. Christian's actions, not fully raising the car window, unlocking the doors near the eatery, his 1,000 times pacing before aiding his wife, phone calls, and not seeking immediate medical attention at a nearby clinic are key evidence for charging him with orchestrating the femicide. Femicide, defined as the intentional murder of a woman simply because she is a woman, was a central theme in the trial of Christian and Paula Ortega's troubled relationship. Shockingly present in today's society, this hate crime was exemplified through Christian's younger age, which seemed to fuel his contempt and abuse towards Paula. Despite her success, Paula lived in a metaphorical golden cage, masking and enabling her husband's tyrannical behavior, allowing him to assert dominance. Years of silence culminated in Christian's sinister plot to seize control of Paula's thriving party empire and gain sole guardianship of their daughter, Maria. Testimonies from over 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, alongside thorough examination of internal and external family communications, revealed Christian's true motives and objectives. Without legal signing rights, He sought to coerce Paula into transferring her company shares. However, his plan failed. Christian didn't physically harm Paula but inflicted severe psychological abuse, artfully concealed under the guise of a perfect family life. According to the Prosecutor General's report, video evidence led to Christian's preventive isolation as the crime's orchestrator. This measure isn't an arrest but a strategy to neutralize a societal threat. Following this action, Christian planned to flee. In the high-profile case against Christian Diego, accused of orchestrating his wife's demise, his defense team worked tirelessly to portray him as a victim. However, they were unable to refute crucial evidence like surveillance footage and falsified company transfer documents. Desperate, the defense then attempted to depict the accused as suffering from a mental disorder, citing episodes of sudden rage. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian, but he was declared competent. His defense counsel, realizing the gravity of the situation, advised Christian to flee the country, asking if his passport was ready and suggesting he buy a ticket to Panama for the next day. However, this plan to escape justice failed. Christian's search for Central American flight tickets raised alarm bells with the authorities. The prosecutor swiftly ordered an 8-hour detainment of Christian Diego, followed by charges and the disclosure of case details to a judge specializing in domestic violence cases. Pending trial, the suspect was held in preliminary detention, pursued as the alleged mastermind behind the heinous act that left 2 young children motherless and an entire family grieving an irreplaceable loss. The Ortega family demands justice for this atrocious crime, emphasizing the devastating impact on the children and their irreplaceable loss. In a case that gripped public attention, the jury concluded that Christian and his 2 accomplices were guilty of a meticulously planned, intentional act of extreme brutality. The unremorseful Christian and his associates were sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Rumiñahui expressed their solidarity with the tragic loss of Paula Alcocer. The institution extends its deepest sympathies to the family and friends affected by this incident. The unfortunate demise of this esteemed businesswoman, friend, mother, and wife, who contributed significantly to the canton's development and brought prosperity to those in her circle, is deeply mourned, their statement read. Paula's case emerged as a prominent instance of violence against women, following the Latin American Association for Alternative Development's report of 332 fatalities due to gender-based violence in 2022. Wedding travel, or as it is also called, honeymoon, an event is definitely important in the life of a young family. It can be a bright impressions received from an unforgettable adventure, or for example, a long-awaited vacation from boring life, somewhere on the Azure coast under the shade of palm trees. But what about when you go on your wedding trip only to commit a real crime, or not to commit it, but only to be accused of it? Would the honeymoon be as bright and carefree in such a case? I don't think so. Unforgettable, of course. Isabella Rodriguez, hereafter Hellman, was born in 1975 in Colombia. It is a country where everyone speaks only Spanish, but Isabella literally dreamed the American dream. She bought books in English, listened to songs on the radio, and all just to learn the language and as soon as possible to leave to conquer the northern part of the continent. However, the language to learn Isabella succeeded, but the southern accent remained with her forever. But this did not prevent the young woman to move to Florida, get a job there as a real estate agent, and help in renting or buying homes like her people who speak only Spanish. In 2002, Isabella, although not to say that she was lucky, but still married William Hellman. And despite the fact that the couple lived in marriage for 10 years, their entire union, a series of continuous quarrels and domestic disputes. Finally, when the patience of the spouses finally burst, they filed for divorce. The divorce process lasted a very long time, as long as 2 years. During these 2 years, Isabella even managed to find a new man, with whom, as it seemed to her, she will certainly find happiness. The new lover's name was Louis Bennett, and he was from Great Britain. As a child, his family moved to live in Australia, thanks to which Louis received dual citizenship and was able to return to his native country and graduate their quite prestigious Canborne School of Mines. But Louis never managed to work in his specialty. It is impossible to say whether this is good or bad, because just a couple of years after graduating in the UK, He returned to Australia and opened his own solar panel manufacturing company, and it is worth noting that it was quite successful because just 4 years later, he was able to enter the American market. And in view of the fact that his main office was in Florida, the young and promising Lewis began to look for a wife there via the internet. It would seem that today, it is easy to get acquainted with someone on the internet, and much easier than to do it in person. But Lewis had no luck with this for a long time. He flipped through the profiles of women, not even paying much attention to them. Those who wrote to him first either scared him off or did not arouse his interest, but when he saw Isabella in the photo, she seemed to him a copy of Jennifer Lopez, and he decided to write to her. It should be noted that they corresponded for quite a long time and very often. Isabella told him about how she always wanted to move to America from Colombia, how long she had been learning the language, how she was looking for a job, and finally, she even confided in him and told him about her past relationships. Bennett was not at all embarrassed by this, especially since Isabella and William's divorce is only a matter of time. As for the young woman herself, she was apparently tired of past relationships and the long divorce, which ate up all the inner strength. She herself took the initiative to meet in person and began to come to Lewis wherever he was, whether it was England, Australia, or even Thailand. And Lewis, trying to strike his new lover, bought a catamaran on which he planned to travel the Caribbean Sea with Isabella. It was his childhood dream, because of frequent moves, quickly find new friends could not manage and had to spend his free time reading adventure books such as Jules Verne or Louis Stevenson. Yes, Bennett has noted that Treasure Island was his favorite book, perhaps for good reason, and it would still play a role in his life. Isabella spent all her free time, whether it was vacation or a long weekend, traveling with Lewis, and she noticed that during these expensive trips, Bennett practically forgot about work. Yes, of course, it could be reduced to the fact that all the processes in his company were so automated that he could live for himself. But nevertheless, Isabella was alarmed. She even once tried to talk to her lover on this topic, but the man either joked away or in full earnest said that he got a huge inheritance and nothing to worry about. Isabella was satisfied with such an answer. In July 2016, the couple had a joyful event. They had a daughter. For Lewis, as well as for Isabella, it was the first child. The girl they named Amelia. And here the young parents began the first disagreements, which Isabella, because of the past sad experience, experienced extremely hard. They could not decide how right they should bring up their daughter. Then, in what country the daughter would be better to grow up. Lewis insisted with all his might that Amelia grew up in Australia, next to his parents, and Isabella, on the contrary, did not want to go anywhere from America. Finally, the young father gave in, and in 2017, the whole family moved to Florida, where they, despite the already born daughter, decided to finally get married. Isabella begged her, now husband, to go on a honeymoon as she hoped that this sea voyage would bring them back to the state when they first got to know each other and carefree sailing around the islands on the high seas on his catamaran. Lewis heard his wife's whims and promised her that there would definitely be a honeymoon, but a little later. And Lewis wasn't lying. In late April 2017, he returned from Australia and the couple headed out on their romantic cruise. Yes, at first, judging by the posts on social media, everything was indeed as Isabella wanted. In all the photos, they are smiling, clasping each other in their arms and traveling around the Caribbean islands. However then, after those endless honeymoon photos, a lull began. A long one, for 2 weeks. When Isabella reappeared online, she told her family that she and her husband were in Cuba and were planning to return to Florida, but didn't know which way yet. She also added that they have a very bad connection here, so in the next few days, they may not expect a call from her. On the night of May 15th, the Coast Guard received a call for help from Lewis. He said he was alone on a raft in the open sea. Rescuers immediately went in search of him. The man was found near the Bahamas, and he was indeed alone on a boat that was filled to the top with various things and provisions. On the shore, Lewis told the following story. On May 14th, after a tiring day, he asked Isabella to give him a few hours of rest and, entrusting his wife with the management of the catamaran, went to take a nap in the cabin. Lewis was awakened by a heavy thump from below, and he called out to his wife, but she did not respond. Then he went upstairs, looked around, and realized that Isabella was nowhere on board, and the very blow that had awakened him had created a hole in the bottom of the catamaran through which water began to enter his vessel, and the boat began to sink. Lewis decided that his wife was simply carried overboard by the blow, and since she was wearing a vest, she was fine, and in order not to go to the bottom with his child, he gathered all his belongings and moved to the rescue boat. Meanwhile, the rescuers, having taken a look at the contents of Lewis's life raft, were surprised, as the man took only those things that belonged to him, as if he had no hope that his beloved Isabella was alive and would soon be found. He even brought his tea set with him. Also in his backpack were found aluminum tubes, inside which were hidden silver coins, but this discovery was not paid attention to because it was necessary to move urgently to search for Isabella. The Coast Guard used absolutely all the equipment they had, including helicopters, and surveyed the entire area, but all to no avail. But they found the very catamaran, which, according to Lewis's statements, crashed on underwater rocks, but there were no underwater rocks or reefs in the vicinity. Nor had the boat itself gone completely to the bottom. It was decided to inspect the boat. For this purpose, several divers were sent to it. Again, the results of their examination did not coincide with Lewis's story. As I said earlier, there were no underwater rocks at the wreck site. The boat simply could not have collided with anything, and the holes that were on the bottom were made from inside the boat, not outside. Another literally shocking oddity in this case was that the boat had all the escape hatches open, which of course increased the rate of sinking of the catamaran, and Lewis mentioned in his story that he left the boat over the side, as he was supposed to. The fact is that escape hatches are strictly forbidden to be opened, and they are needed only when there is no other way to leave the sinking vessel. Also, Lewis, being an experienced seafarer, did not use a beacon or satellite phone, which would have helped rescuers to find travelers in time in case of disaster. That is, from the outside, it looked as if Lewis deliberately sank the ship and made it look like an accident. But then, where is his wife? On May 17th, the search for Isabella continued, although 120 hours had passed since the catamaran wreck, while the possibility of finding a woman alive in the middle of the open sea is only 13 hours. On May 18th, the search stopped. Isabella has not been found to this day. Lewis himself returned home on May 15th, as if he wasn't really worried about missing Isabella, and what's more, he bought just one ticket to Australia for May 19th, so he didn't even hope that the rescue team would be able to find his wife, dead or alive. But he tried his best to get his wife's death certificate as soon as possible so that he could get the insurance he was entitled to as a close relative. This was denied. After the insurance company refused, Lewis visited Isabella's parents and tried to take his daughter away from them. They blamed him for Isabella's death and did not want to give Amelia away. He was able to take his daughter only after calling the police. On May 28th, he left Amelia with his parents in the UK and returned to Florida to try again to get the insurance payment, which by law was entitled to him. To the police, Lewis's behavior seemed extremely suspicious. They were literally sure that he was to blame for his wife's disappearance, but they had no evidence. Even the catamaran on which the murder could theoretically have taken place, and on which it was possible to find evidence confirming it, had gone to the bottom, to a great depth, and it was impossible to get it out of there. But the search of the house where Lewis and Isabella lived, as well as Lewis's own cell phone, proved fruitful. Yes, the fact that the husband and wife could not communicate with each other for weeks, and the husband himself could periodically disappear from home and not appear there for a long time, is not considered any evidence. But the fact that in the house were found recording devices on which Isabella recorded constant threats of her husband already pushed the investigation to the idea that not everything in their relationship was smooth, because judging by these records, Lewis repeatedly promised to kill his wife. Isabella even told her friends about it and shared with them that she wanted to leave her fierce husband and cruel tyrant, but only try one more time, now the last, to save their relationship. But as we already know, she never succeeded. The main reason for quarrels were debts Lewis: real estate, electricity, credit cards. He literally drowned in debt, and get out of this pit, it seemed impossible. Moreover, he did not try to solve his problems
but only continued to travel on his catamaran, still did not work anywhere, and in addition spent some of the rest of his savings on such things as Thai boxing lessons in Thailand. Of course, Isabella didn't like it, and in the meantime, Lewis even forced his wife to give up child rearing and get a job so that she could pay off his debts while he was doing more important things. Looking into Lewis Bennett's debts, the investigation also found that between 2014 and 2016, the man engaged in international transfers totaling about $160,000. As it turned out, the very coins that rescuers found in Lewis's backpack were very rare and collectible. Later, the investigation will establish that the coins were stolen in 2016. One of Lewis's acquaintances, who at that time was a member of the crew of the ship Kitty, and when the crew went to town, this acquaintance stole the coins and gave them to Lewis for further resale. Yes, it was for smuggling that the investigation managed to put Lewis behind bars, because during a search of the house, in addition to those tape recordings, the police found some of the coins. For smuggling, Lewis received 7 months in prison. There, while behind bars, the man also received a second charge, just for the involuntary manslaughter of his wife. The investigation carefully checked all the facts that they had on their hands, in which they so scrupulously collected piece by piece, and came to the conclusion that during their trip, Isabella found in her husband's things those very collectible coins, and between them there was a scandal. But it was not entirely clear whether Isabella had been killed on the boat or in the water. During the quarrel, quite fiery and somewhere even cruel husband could either not calculate the force of the blow or throw the woman into the water and then do not provide her with any help. And so Isabella drowned while her husband watched her torment, being on board. During the tragedy, Lewis realized that his wife's death was a good thing for him, and if he made it look like a sinking boat accident, he would get an additional payout for the sinking catamaran in addition to the money for Isabella's death, since it was also considered an insured event. But only the whole story on the part of the prosecution was just a fantasy of the grief-stricken relatives. Lewis was never charged with premeditated murder. For lack of evidence, he was offered a deal that if he pleaded guilty, he would only get 8 years. Lewis accepted. But should he have agreed to it, if he really is not guilty, and all the evidence against him is only a tape recorder where he threatens his wife? Isabella's relatives were of course furious at this verdict, but also realized that otherwise Lewis Bennett would serve the rest of his time for the smuggling article and be released very soon. In November 2018, Lewis Bennett received 8 years in prison, and all of the insurance payments and all of his wife's assets, which he had claimed, and for which he had arranged all of this, will go to Amelia. Also, the court ordered Lewis to pay monetary compensation to his daughter, who has yet to experience such serious psychological trauma as she grows up.
Wake up. Is anyone alive in this house? Judy cheerfully entered the home of her sister, Linda Slayton. The morning of September 4th was normal, but something seemed off. Judy often visited her nephews, and today she came to their home as usual. A cup of hot coffee and a friendly conversation with her sister was how their day usually began. "Where are you, little slackers?" Judy smiled, peering into the room of her nephews, who were sleepily rubbing their eyes. She was surprised to see Linda still asleep, for she usually woke up before the boys left for school. Judy left the house and noticed that the window in her sister's room was wide open and one of the curtains was missing. It was strange. "Why aren't you in school yet? Is your mom sick? Why is she still sleeping?" Judy walked restlessly toward her sister's bedroom. "Linda Slayton, I want to see you." Judy knocked on the door, but there was no answer. The next instant, the sight that came into view made her heart sink. Her sister's body lay across the bed, her head hanging to the floor. The young woman was half undressed, and a wire hanger was wrapped around her neck. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. The closet was open, but otherwise, everything looked normal, Linda's things lying in their places. Upon seeing her sister's body, Judy screamed, and the janitor working outside called the police. The police arrived and asked the children to leave the house, which had now become a crime scene. Jeff was able to walk past his mother's room without looking at her body. Tim, on the other hand, looked into the room and saw his mother dead. The boys were sent to their grandparents' house for the duration of the investigation. That fateful morning was the beginning of a mysterious and dark story. It changed their lives forever. Linda Slayton was born on a spring day, March 8, 1950. The girl dreamed of a large and happy family. Her fate, however, did not turn out the way she wanted. At the age of 19, Linda entered into marriage with Frank Slayton. At this age, she was already a mother. 3 years before the wedding, the couple had their first son, Jeffrey, and after another year, a younger son, Timothy, was born. And only after another year, Linda managed to convince the father of their children, Frank, to become a family. But, alas, this marriage turned out to be far from her expectations. Frank, after becoming a husband and father, disappointed his family. He turned out to be a cruel man. His outbursts of anger regularly fell on his wife and sons. Jeff and Tim's memories of their childhood were filled with nightmares. Their father was an aggressive alcoholic who kept his family in suspense. Linda often thought about divorce, but fear and addiction prevented her from taking that step. However, in 1974, after 9 long years of marriage, she gathered the last vestiges of strength and determination. Leaving behind the hell that was their family, Linda took her sons and left Frank Slayton. It was the first step towards a new life where Linda hoped she could give her sons the security and happiness they had been denied for so long. She didn't yet know the trials that lay ahead, including that terrible day that became fateful for her family. After the divorce, Linda and her 2 children lived at 303 North Brunel Parkway in Lakeland, Florida, which was one of Polk County's densely populated cities. In 1981, it was a place where business was booming, and new residential neighborhoods were being built on every corner. These were mostly duplexes where large families settled. Lakeland, with its abundance of lawns and greenery, was very attractive to residents. One of the many duplex homes belonged to the Slayton family. Despite this, they didn't stay in it for long. It is known that Linda and her sons moved to Florida from Hartselle, Alabama, just 2 weeks before the horrific crime. What could have led to such a gruesome tragedy? Perhaps Linda brought not only her children with her, but also dark issues from her past. After her divorce, Linda Slayton began a new life as a single mom. She strived to give her children everything she could, torn between work and home responsibilities. Linda didn't have a car, so her sons either walked to school or neighbors drove them. Despite the hardships, Linda never gave up and tried to provide her children with everything they needed. In addition to school activities, the boys also participated in the soccer section. But since it was not always easy to get there without a car, Coach Joe became their savior. He regularly drove the brothers from home to the stadium and back. A week before the tragic events on September 4th, Linda was actively preparing for her mother's move. She was sure that a woman living with them would be able to help Linda cope with the daily household chores and create an atmosphere of comfort and family harmony in the house. On the evening of September 3rd, Jeff returned home from a workout. He felt an empty feeling in his stomach, but there was no food in the house, so he decided to go to his grandmother's house. When he returned around 9:30 p.m., his brother and mother were not in the house. The boy turned on the TV in an attempt to distract himself, but his anxious thoughts did not leave him. The quarrel with his mother, which had occurred the day before, did not give him peace. He tried to put it out of his mind, but when he came home and did not find his relatives, he began to feel a strange longing. Usually at this time, their house was in a state of excitement. Linda's mother was cooking dinner in the kitchen, the smell of delicious food filling the house, and her younger brother Tim was merrily hanging around, sometimes running up to Jeff, hoping for a conversation. But sensing his brother's displeasure, he ran back to his mother. These moments were repeated several times until everyone was gathered around the table for dinner. Around 11:30 p.m., the noise and laughter of family members in the hallway interrupted Jeff's musings. His heart began to beat more calmly. His mother and brother came home, and Jeff finally went back to watching the movie that was coming to an end. At dinner, Linda talked about going to spend the evening with the neighbors and playing cards, but before that, she decided to do some housework. When his younger brother Tim went to bed, Jeff stayed and helped his mom wash the dishes. Before going to bed, he decided to stop by her room to apologize for the fight that happened between them earlier. Jeff remembers that his last words were, "I love you, Mom. I'll see you tomorrow." If only he had known that those words would be the last words he was able to say to his mother. September 4th, 1981 was a tragic day in the lives of two brothers, 12-year-old Tim and 15-year-old Jeff. It was then, on that terrible day, that they found their mother, Linda Slayton, dead in her bed. At the time, Linda was only 31 years old. Who could have committed such horrific cruelty against the mother of two defenseless children? Was it someone they knew, or was Linda the victim of a random attack? After Jeff and Tim left for their grandmother's house, Sergeant Edgar Pickett of the Lakeland Police Department arrived on the scene. He was the first detective to begin investigating this terrible tragedy. As soon as he arrived, police officers, reporters, and ambulances streamed to the house. The place was cordoned off. Yellow tape reading, "Crime scene, no trespassing," was stretched around the house. Sergeant Pickett was the first to uncover the most important piece of evidence in the case. On a window where the curtain was missing, he discovered a palm print that did not belong to the murdered Linda. This footprint could have been an important DNA sample, but at the time DNA testing was not yet widespread. To find out the exact cause of Linda's death, her body was sent for an autopsy. It revealed bruises on her shoulders, arms, and neck. The fact that she was half naked indicated a possible rape. After a detailed autopsy, it became clear that Linda had first been severely beaten, then abused, and then strangled with a hanger from her own closet. This horrific scenario became the starting point of the investigation, but there were still many questions. To solve the mystery of Linda Slayton's murder, the police decided to go through the genealogical tree of the Slayton family. The first suspect turned out to be Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Information about him indicated that he was a violent and aggressive man who often abused his wife and children and showed no concern for the family. Quite expectedly, Frank immediately came under the suspicion of the police. He was detained for questioning, but it soon became clear that he was in Alabama on the night of the murder. Nevertheless, the police did not rule him out as a suspect. The second suspect was Linda's eldest son, Jeff. On the day before the murder, he and his mother had a serious argument. According to witnesses, the relationship between Linda and her son had been strained recently. Jeff, as the eldest child in the family, had experienced the full brunt of living with an abusive father and then with his mother, who was raising his brothers alone. Their frequent conflicts were in plain sight, but Jeff always tried to smooth over quarrels and make peace with his mother, just as he did the night before Linda's murder. The police conducted 2 polygraph tests for Jeff, and both times the results were negative, thus eliminating him from the list of suspects. Third on the suspect list was Linda's boyfriend, whose name has not been released. This white man was a close friend of Linda's and often socialized with her children, but polygraph testing revealed nothing suspicious, and police were forced to clear him of suspicion. After Linda's funeral, the family gradually began to get the brothers' lives back to normal. The boys went back to school and tried to suppress in their minds the horrible event that had occurred at 303 North Brunel Parkway. Tim continued to attend soccer practice, and he always felt support from his team and coaches. Coach Joe stayed true to his promise and continued to give Tim rides home after practice. A month after the tragedy, Tim put a picture of the team and coach by his bed. Weeks turned to weeks, months turned to years, but the case of Linda's murder remained unsolved. The Slayton brothers had to accept the hard reality of their new life. Their mother had been murdered, and only their grandparents, Clarence and Margaret Harris, were left with them to support them through this difficult time. It had been a full 17 years since the horrific murder of Linda Slayton. The years have passed, and the boys who lost their mother have grown into grown men full of love and care for their own families. Both brothers started families, and Jeff had 2 children. However, he never forgot that last night. "I didn't hear anything at all. Even the neighbors claim they didn't hear anything suspicious that night. It weighs heavily on me," he often repeated in conversation with his loved ones. Sometimes, sitting in front of the television waiting for dinner, while his wife fussed in the kitchen and his children ran around him, Jeff would catch a glimpse of the past. At such moments, he was taken back to his childhood home, to the last evening with his mother. The unsettling feelings that had gripped him that last evening seemed to foretell a horror that would change his life forever. The voices of his children and wife, each time as a rescue, brought Jeff back to reality. Despite the successful lives the brothers have built, they have never stopped following the investigation and have worked hard to keep the case alive. They regularly return to Lakeland to see if there was any news in their mother's case. In an interview, Tim said, "No matter how many investigators are replaced, we always remind them that we are waiting to find whoever killed our mom. The burden is on us, and I can't let it go." In 2001, detectives finally had a new thread that could lead to the solution of this long-standing mystery. In the same neighborhood where Linda was murdered, police arrested a man named Jimmy Ulmer, who had similar mannerisms to Linda's killer. He was charged with the attempted murder of a little girl he had tried to pull through the window of her room. The police began to scrutinize his connections and alibis and discovered that he was now already sentenced to 80 years in prison for other crimes. For the police, he became the prime suspect. However, a small problem arose. By that time, Jimmy had already passed away, and it was impossible to conduct DNA testing. However, Jimmy's mother agreed to provide a sample of her DNA. Unfortunately, the results did not match the sample found at Linda's murder scene. The investigation again went unanswered. In 1998, the investigator who had been looking into Linda Slayton's murder, Edgar Pickett, resigned and was replaced by a new detective, Brad Grace. Grace discovered an unidentified DNA sample that had been collected at the crime scene back in 1981. He decided to send that sample to the state's largest laboratory, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, to try to identify Linda's killer from the DNA. By 1999, the department already had the means to conduct such tests, and Detective Grace sprang into action. He reviewed the list of suspects and decided to collect DNA samples from each of them. In 2001, he was confident that he could find the perpetrator through his DNA. He first contacted the Slayton brothers and asked them to submit DNA samples for comparison with samples found at the crime scene. The results of the analysis completely ruled the brothers out as suspects. Detective Grace then contacted Linda's ex-husband, Frank Slayton. Frank, after Linda's death, had reevaluated his life and was living a good life. Frank voluntarily gave up his DNA samples. Again, no matches were found. In 2005, Grace submitted DNA samples from the unknown perpetrator to the FBI to be tested against the data in the federal database. These comparisons were made regularly, but were inconclusive. Eventually, 17 years after Linda Slayton's murder, Detective Grace retired and was replaced by Detectives Tammy Hathcock and Russell Hurley. After 3 more years of investigation, Tammy Hathcock learned of a new DNA recognition technology developed at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. She sent a DNA sample from the crime scene to expert Cecile Moore. Using a genealogical database and other documents, Cecile Moore compiled a family tree that led to the person suspected of killing Linda Slayton. This moment proved to be a turning point in the investigation and a shocking one for the Slayton brothers. The face of the killer was in one of the photographs in Tim's bedroom. That man turned out to be Joseph Clinton Mills, also known as Coach Joe. Police began investigating Mills' background and found that he had been charged with grand larceny and forging a will, but was not convicted of it. His fingerprints and palm prints were kept in police databases. To establish Joseph Mills' guilt, police had to match his DNA to that found at the scene of Linda Slayton's murder. Detectives decided to obtain a sample of Mills' DNA without his knowledge. The veracity of this information is unknown, but this is the version that is included in the case. Police collected trash from a dumpster at Mills' house and found a Band-Aid with traces of blood on it. This patch was sent for examination. At this time, detectives were investigating the suspect's background. Joseph Mills had spent most of his life in the town of Kettleman, which is only 30 minutes from the crime scene. He had a family, children, and grandchildren. 2 weeks later, the lab's response came back. The DNA from Linda Slayton's murder scene matched Joseph Mills' DNA. This result became a key piece of evidence in the case, and Joseph Mills was arrested and charged with the murder of Linda Slayton. In December 2019, Joseph Mills was arrested and taken to police for questioning. He was only 20 years old at the time of Linda Slayton's murder in 1981. Detectives conducted an interview with Mills at the time, but it was done over the phone, and he did not become a suspect in the murder. Now, after years of investigation, it was impossible for Mills to deny his involvement in the crime. According to his testimony, on the night of the murder, he had come to Linda's home with her consent for sexual relations. But detectives doubted his version. They speculated that Mills had been watching Linda for some time because he regularly drove her children to practice. According to investigators' version, after the coach brought the boy home from practice, he waited until the house was empty before sneaking into Linda's room through a window. Hiding in a closet, he waited until she was alone in the room. He then came out of hiding, beat and abused Linda, and strangled her with a wire hanger from her own closet. At trial, Joseph Mills was found guilty of first-degree murder and rape. The investigation and trial finally brought long-awaited justice to this horrific crime that had gone unsolved for years. The sons of the murdered woman were still left in shock and could not understand what motivated Joseph to kill their mother. The court hearing was tense. Linda Slayton's children, Tim and Jeff, sat on a spectator bench defending the memory of their mother. At the center of attention was Joseph Clinton Mills, Coach Joe. This man who once seemed like a role model sat in an accusatory cage. His gaze was cold and indifferent, as if nothing had happened. Tim Slayton, the oldest of the brothers, looked at the man he had once revered and now saw in him the face of evil. The fire of indignation burned in Tim's eyes, and he jumped to his feet, turning to Joseph. "Why? I just want to understand why, Joe. Why did you kill our mom? Why did you take her away from us? We were so happy." Mills only mumbled back, "I'm a good man." The Slayton family never received an apology or remorse from him. Probably even the killer himself had a hard time explaining his actions. This came as a shock to Tim, because as a child he had considered Coach Joe a role model. Now he is left with only questions and painful memories. Joseph Mills was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As if a heavy stone had fallen from the Slayton brothers' shoulders, their mother was finally avenged. And while the brothers console themselves with the thought that the killer will spend the rest of his days in prison, they are still furious at the fact that Joseph Mills enjoyed freedom for nearly 40 years while they lost their mother. Linda Slayton's story, her tragic death, and years of investigation have left an incredible mark on her sons. Tim and Jeff Slayton, two brothers who not only witnessed this tragedy, but also became first-hand participants in the investigation, share their experiences and feelings. "He kept asking us how the case was going," says Tim, the older of the brothers. "He didn't ask specific questions. He just wanted to know if there was any news on the case, if there was any new evidence, and I just told him that nothing had changed." Tim still can't believe that his mother's killer was a man he considered a friend and respected. The picture of him standing behind Joseph Mills has always reminded him that life goes on, but without his mom. Jeff, the younger brother, always thinks about how his life would have turned out if Mom had been alive. This tragedy has left an unbearable void in his heart that nothing can fill. Despite all the hardship and suffering, the Slayton brothers try to live a full life for their mother, Linda Slayton. They visit her grave regularly, placing fresh flowers and praying that she knows they will never forget her and will continue to fight for justice. Linda Slayton's story is one of fortitude, of incredible endurance, and of the fact that even after the most horrific losses, the love and memory of loved ones lives on in the hearts of those left behind.
In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. The entire world began to shut down, and people were gripped with shock and fear of an unknown disease. On March 23rd, 12-year-old daughter Gretchen Anthony, who was visiting her father at the time, received a text message from her mother. "Good morning. I have tested positive for the coronavirus. That means I will have to stay home for at least 2 weeks." "Okay, I really hope you feel better," Ava replied. Shortly thereafter, the mom stopped sharing the location of her phone with her daughter. Over the next 3 days, friends and family members received several text messages describing Gretchen's deteriorating condition. What was strange was that no one could reach the 51-year-old woman. She didn't even call her beloved young daughter, which was very unlike a loving mom. Those close to her began to suspect a scenario far worse than even an acute case of COVID-19. Someone else was sending messages from Gretchen's phone to cover up her disappearance. The police got involved, and soon it became clear to investigators looking for Gretchen that someone was indeed using the pandemic to cover up the woman's disappearance. Gretchen was born on January 8, 1969, in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. She spent most of her life up north, attending fashion school in New York City before moving to New Jersey, where she eventually became a teacher. In 2006, the blue-eyed blonde moved to Jupiter, the northernmost city in Palm Beach County, Florida. After working in the county's private schools for 8 years, Gretchen decided to try something new and took a job in the Human Resources Department of Viking Utility, an electrical contractor. The position allowed her to interact with new people, which Gretchen enjoyed. She considered the workforce her second family. Her first marriage didn't work out, but the former spouses remained on good terms and continued to raise their beloved daughter with shared custody. Gretchen led an active lifestyle and spent a lot of time in sports. It was through sports that she met David Anthony. Charismatic, able to charm David, who was 7 years younger than Gretchen, first became her personal trainer and then her second husband. Women from all over the county came to see the young, muscular trainer. David was a star in the gym and was very popular, attracting many new students. Gretchen fell in love. The romance developed rapidly. After a brief engagement, the couple got married at the Eldest Chapel in Las Vegas. So in 2015, Gretchen Stoughton Crane became Gretchen Stoughton Anthony and found, in her opinion, the husband of her dreams. Gretchen's daughter adored her stepfather and even called him Bonus Dad. In total, the couple lived in marriage for 5 years. However, the relationship that began with magic and perfect happiness gradually turned into a woman's fear for her safety. When tragedy struck, police and later journalists began to inquire about the identity of the second spouse. They were in for a lot of surprises. As it turned out, David Ethan Anthony was originally known as David Anthony Deutsch, and then later changed his name. David Anthony Deutsch, a star college basketball player, was arrested in 1997 for robbing a Blockbuster video store with a water pistol and assaulting a police officer. In each case, he took a plea bargain and spent some time in jail. Growing up without a father in Palm Beach Gardens, David spent much of his childhood and adolescence alone. He didn't talk much, was withdrawn, had low self-esteem, and was bullied at school for being overweight. He wasn't even allowed to join a recreational sports league because he was so much larger than all the other kids. Not surprisingly, as a teenager, David struggled with severe depression and developed symptoms that his family believed were consistent with bipolar disorder.
However, he refused to take any medication, devoted himself fanatically to sports, and really excelled at it. After high school, David received a scholarship to play college basketball and became a star on the team. He idolized basketball greats and even named his husky Kobe after his favorite basketball player, Kobe Bryant. On January 26, 2020, the idol will die in a helicopter crash, and this event will be another reason for David's unstable behavior. In the meantime, the smart, attractive coach ignores mental problems, bathes in deserved popularity, and becomes the husband of Gretchen. The couple lead an active lifestyle. David enjoys bicycling, deep-sea fishing, and kayaking. Gretchen works out hard at the gym, goes to the beach, kayaks, and does yoga. Unfortunately, only the first 2 years of marriage will prove to be happy. The remaining 3 years, the smiling blonde will spend trying to leave. Gretchen admitted to friends that her husband's behavior was becoming more and more manic, and at times he insulted her. They once even broke up for at least 6 months but got back together. Tabitha Hopkins, David's former boss at the gym, later recalled noticing strange mood swings in David. In 2017, things got so bad that Tabitha was forced to fire him for his aggressive behavior, especially towards women. David was indeed behaving very strangely and was unwilling to seek help. The man became obsessed with the end of the world and loaded 3 large bags of rice, several pots, pans, and 10 pairs of shoes into his truck in 2018. His family believed this episode was a symptom of bipolar and manic depressive disorder. Bad periods were followed by good ones in which David tried to do something about his behavior. He even managed to get Tabitha Hopkins to give him his job back by assuring the gym owner that he was trying to be a better person and attending self-improvement seminars. Tabitha softened. There was no denying David's effectiveness as a trainer. The clients were delighted with him. Over time, as the mental illness continued untreated, David's condition worsened. Gretchen recognized that her husband had problems and shared this with friends. Sometimes, she said, she would lock herself in their bedroom just to increase the distance between them. "I noticed this crazy look in his eyes," she texted a friend, Dawn, one morning in late December. David was gaining momentum, and the spouse didn't know what he was capable of. "I'm watching him on the cameras and waiting for him to go to bed," Gretchen wrote another evening. "Then I'll go downstairs, get a knife, and put it under my pillow, just in case, and hopefully sleep." That same year, on Christmas Eve, Gretchen couldn't find her personal belongings. She searched the house, looked in David's backpack, and found her wedding ring, passport, driver's license, credit cards, and some money. The incident so disturbed Gretchen that she texted Don, her boss and friend, that she was afraid of her own husband. By the end of the month, Gretchen made the decision to end the tumultuous relationship. In December 2019, she forced David to move out of the townhouse to her mother's house, who lived nearby, and changed the locks. It was during this time that David's colleagues noticed a gradual change in his behavior. Most of the time, the trainer was one of the first to arrive at the gym, but after the events in the family, he began to come later and later, seemed more and more withdrawn and sullen. On January 26th, Kobe Bryant, David's idol, dies. When Kobe Bryant passed away, something happened, Tabitha recalls. "You'd think David and Kobe Bryant were best friends. He was traumatized by it." In the days that followed, David was hysterical, crying and wailing in front of the fitness club groups he led and refusing to go home. Despite his emotionally fragile state, David took an active role in a controversial self-improvement program called Gratitude Training, which critics likened to a cult. He spent thousands of dollars on seminars, but refused to tell his family what he was doing during the sessions. David's behavior regressed. On February 24th, he failed to show up for work. When Tabitha tried to find out if he was okay, he attacked her, and the supervisor made the decision to terminate the employee permanently. This time, Tabitha caught a glimpse of David's frightening rage and was truly frightened. Hopkins texted Gretchen about the incident and asked her to be careful. "That's the last time I talked to Gretchen," she would later say. 4 days later, on February 28th, 2020, just weeks before her disappearance, Gretchen files for divorce. David's stability is rapidly going downhill, and he is becoming increasingly hostile. On March 7th, the woman David had begun dating booked a seat at an unusual art class. They were to drink wine and draw pictures under the guidance of the instructor. However, the evening did not go according to plan. When David wished to hug his companion during the class and she rejected the attempt, he jumped up, yelled at her in the middle of the class, and ran outside. David's behavior frightened the young woman, and she decided not to continue the interaction, telling him that he could not stay with her tonight. When they got to the house where David had left his truck, it became clear that David had different ideas about the matter. David, whom she'd only known for a month, had decided to move in with her. Duffel bags filled with men's clothes were spread out on her bed and dining room table, and food from his mother's house was stashed in the freezer. Kobe, David's husky, was running around in the backyard. David left only after a new friend called her neighborhood security company. When Gretchen went missing, her family told investigators that David was returning to her home after he left. The young woman was concerned for her safety and installed surveillance cameras throughout the house and garage. On March 11th, the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. A few days later, David, believing the pandemic to be an end-of-the-world prophecy, showed up at Gretchen's house in the early morning hours. He believed the world was coming to an end and walked around the windows trying to convince his almost ex-wife to go with him to Costa Rica, where he thought they could escape the virus. After a few hours, Gretchen relented and allowed David into the house. That evening, a patrolling police officer noticed David, visibly nervous and sweaty, strutting around outside a Riviera Beach restaurant and at one point approaching a group of teenage girls. The officer noticed David's license plate, partially covered with black duct tape, and headed toward him. David claimed that his 12-year-old stepdaughter had taped the license plate and began to act even more nervous. The man ignored the police officer's orders not to move, yanked open the door of his truck, and began searching for something under the seat. Fearing what would happen next, the officer pointed a gun at David and ordered him to the ground. When the officers looked under the driver's seat where David was trying to reach, they found a large knife. David was arrested for resisting arrest, but posted bail a few days later and was released. The pandemic was gaining momentum. In the early 20s of March, some states began banning people from leaving their homes. Gretchen, like everyone else, was trying to figure out how to live in the new realities. She shared informational videos about the virus and how to stay safe, posting memes and jokes mocking the absurdity of the new normal. On Thursday, March 19th, she posted a quote from a meditation blog. "When there is chaos around you, the wisest choice is to create peace within yourself." After that, her profile was no longer active, and she stopped answering calls and messages. This moment divided life into before and after for all of her near and dear ones. Texting from Gretchen Anthony's phone to friends and family began on March 23, 2020. Over the course of several days, friends and family received a series of messages from Gretchen stating that she was quarantined at home, then describing her deteriorating condition and hospitalization in the emergency room at Jupiter Medical Center. Another message claimed she was transferred to another CDC facility that did not exist. On March 24th, Don Paris, Gretchen's supervisor and friend, received a message from her saying, "I tested positive for coronavirus early this morning. This is bad news, but I am at a coronavirus CDC treatment center that only handles COVID cases. The good news is that my blood type can potentially be used in treatment. I'm not sure if you remember when I said I have a strain of mad cow disease in my blood. Well, that strain is important for gathering more answers and finding a cure. For safety reasons, Dr. Sinclair and her team strongly encourage program participants to keep contact only with immediate family members. I chose my mom. Gretchen's ex-husband, who had his 12-year-old stepdaughter visiting, also began receiving messages from Gretchen saying that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, had quarantined her. She could be placed in a medically induced coma, and she would no longer be able to write." Jeff Dreyer didn't believe these reports. He was confused by the multiple text errors and abbreviations. The manner of speech in the messages sounded more like David Anthony, and Jeff became alarmed. In addition, it bothered everyone who received these messages that no one, not even his daughter Gretchen, never called. Friends couldn't imagine Gretchen dying of anything, since at 51 she was in good shape and took her health very seriously. When calls to the medical center confirmed that Gretchen Anthony had not been admitted there, the family along with friends decided to contact the police to check if their loved one was doing well. Gretchen Anthony's boss told police that she was last at work on March 20th, and when he called her insurance company to see if she was receiving medical care anywhere, they said there had been no referrals under her policy to process treatment. Jupiter Police Detective Jared Kennerson contacted Jupiter Medical Center and found that the hospital's records did not mention anything about such a patient. In fact, police found that Gretchen had not been to Jupiter Medical Center since 2008. Police checked the medical center parking lot and found a Mini Cooper in the parking lot. In the car, Gretchen's purse was lying in the most visible spot, causing patrol officers to become concerned. Officers went to the missing person's home. What they discovered at Gretchen's home was alarming and turned a simple visit into a potential murder investigation. A neighbor approached the officers and gave them the disturbing information. "Early Saturday morning on Saturday, March 21st, I heard a very desperate female screaming as if she was being attacked. And then I heard her scream, 'No!' And then I heard something like, 'It hurts, stop.' The scream was really serious." Unfortunately, Gretchen didn't call emergency services. Some people are just wary of calling the police. Officers became even more concerned when another neighbor told them he later noticed a soapy substance leaking from under Gretchen's garage door. The front door leading to the garage was locked, and the key was broken in the deadbolt. When officers were able to open the door, they detected a strong, pungent odor of cleaning product in the garage. Using body cameras, patrol officers searched the house several times. They found evidence of a violent struggle, a broken picture frame, shards of glass on Gretchen's bed, and a soiled towel. Officers noticed that surveillance cameras inside the house had been removed from the walls, possibly to destroy compromising evidence, and sent a request to a service provider to recover the footage from the cloud. Police officials made inquiries and discovered that a neighbor had taken a photo of a black Nissan pickup truck parked outside Gretchen's home after the terrifying screams. The exact same pickup truck was owned by Gretchen's almost ex-husband, David Anthony, who suddenly decided to leave. His mother told police that her son packed up his truck and hit the road on Tuesday, March 24, 2020, saying he was going to Costa Rica. Their suspicions were heightened when they saw on video taken in the parking lot of Jupiter Medical Center, where Gretchen's car was found, a Mini Cooper pull into a parking space, and a tall figure, the height of David Anthony, emerge from the vehicle. Investigators began tracking Gretchen's cell phone and found that it was registered in the Pensacola, Florida area. As would later be confirmed, David had driven just 600 miles to Pensacola, Florida's westernmost city. After stopping at a couple of local pawn shops to sell some women's jewelry, he and his dog, Kobe, continued west, stopping for one night at a hotel in Pecos, Texas, before settling in Las Cruces, New Mexico. While 2,000 miles away, David contacted detectives and reported that Gretchen was alive and in no danger. He explained that his spouse had provided him with a written statement, which he read aloud over the phone. According to the statement, Gretchen discovered financial crimes at her job and fled Florida with David, fearing for her life. The statement also said she also fled from her first ex-husband, Jeff. Detectives didn't believe it and continued to investigate. They tracked Gretchen and David's cell phone signals, which indicated that the two phones were together. Expecting the worst, detectives obtained a warrant to impound the truck on March 29th and enlisted the help of Las Cruces police to arrange a traffic stop. Las Cruces police detained David, seized the truck and property, including his phone and Gretchen's phone, but they still didn't have enough evidence to call him in for questioning. He was allowed to just walk away. On March 30th, 2020, Jupiter police obtained electronic records from Gretchen's home, and investigators finally learned the truth. On the morning of March 21st, David lurked silently on the porch overlooking the back of the garage. In his hands, he held an elongated object. 6 minutes later, Gretchen appeared in the footage. The video shows David forcibly driving her into the garage, and a scream can be heard over the footage. First, Gretchen yelled to the Amazon Alexa device in the garage, "Alexa, turn on the lights in the garage." The surveillance camera audio then captured a muffled thud and Gretchen's muffled screams. She then yelled to Alexa again, "Alexa, call 911. Gretchen didn't know that unless she specifically programmed her smart speaker to call 911, the device wouldn't call the police in an emergency. After a while, David's face appeared in the frame, his hands wearing gloves. In one shot, Gretchen's bloody head could be seen as he walked around the garage. Investigators have seen enough. On March 30th, detectives get a warrant for David's arrest. Gretchen's case went from being a missing persons case to a murder investigation. Detective Kennerson rushed to Las Cruces. Shortly before midnight, March 31st, police arrested David outside a convenience store. Jupiter detectives questioned him at the state police headquarters in Las Cruces, New Mexico. They had one goal, to get David to reveal the whereabouts of Gretchen's body, and the detectives failed. David claimed that Gretchen was alive. In fact, during the interrogation, David Anthony made this claim 35 times. Detectives even tried using a voice recording of Gretchen's daughter, whom David really loved. With her father's permission, the girl recorded her request. "David, it's Ava. I love you. I'm scared. I miss my mom," she told him. "I need to know where my mom is. Please do the right thing and tell me where my mom is. Please. I love you." Detectives played the tape to David, but he remained indifferent. While behind bars, he refused to say anything about what had happened to Gretchen. In his typical restraint, he remained silent for months. David knew it would be difficult for the prosecutor to get a conviction without Gretchen's body. He was charged with second-degree murder and extradited to Florida. While David was in custody in Palm Beach County, Florida,
A grand jury indicted him for kidnapping and upgraded the murder charge from second-degree to first-degree murder. This was a turning point, and in December 2020, after 8 months in prison, the criminal took a plea deal with the prosecutor. The fact is that he could have faced the death penalty for first-degree murder. Under the terms of the deal, David would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 38-year prison sentence. The main condition of the deal was that he would lead investigators to Gretchen's body. On December 21st, 9 months after Gretchen Anthony disappeared, David Anthony admitted what everyone already knew. He killed his wife. Gretchen's body was found wrapped in a blanket 3 miles from her home, in the woods behind a Walmart store and near a nursing home.
Investigators determined she died from stab wounds to her neck and torso. There were several defensive wounds. She was fighting for her life. At the sentencing hearing, David Anthony said the COVID-19 pandemic was a contributing factor to his crime because he saw the pandemic as Armageddon from which he had to flee. My delusions saw the COVID pandemic as a prophecy of the end of the world, an Armageddon that I felt compelled to avoid at all costs. Under the terms of the plea agreement, David Anthony was sentenced to 38 years in prison on January 14, 2021. He is currently serving his sentence at the Martin Correctional Institution in Florida. On December 1, 2022, the Mendoza Criminal Court stood waiting, holding its breath. The atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, and the surrounding area was filled with people waiting for the verdict. On the dock sat a woman aged 32, dressed in a black dress, with white beads around her neck. Her face expressed not a single emotion, and her eyes burned with only equanimity and restraint. She was preparing to hear the judgment that would determine her fate and leave a mark on history. Everyone in the room had known this woman for many years, but now they were faced with a mystery that was difficult for them to understand. Outside the courtroom doors, the approaching footsteps of the judge could be heard, like the pounding of a heart, echoing in the silence and felt in every corner of the place. Everyone knew that what was at stake today was not only the fate of the woman in the dock, but also the truth that had remained in the shadows for so long. There was a whole story behind this woman, the events of which were as mysterious as she was. The truth of this real crime is hidden in the details, and the trial becomes a real challenge for all involved. Marital is a small town hidden among the mountains and valleys of the Argentine province of Mendoza. This is the place where nature reveals its most beautiful colors. In autumn, the streets are sprinkled with golden leaves, and the mountain peaks are painted in shades of orange and red. The residents of Marital know each other well, and everyone can tell the biography of their neighbors. Here, people share joys and sorrows, support each other in difficult moments, and celebrate important events together. In this secluded place, among the mountains and valleys, Rolando Angeliquino and Karen Oviedo began a romance that would later shake Marital and all of Argentina. When the streets of the city, surrounded by colors of autumn gold, as if frozen in anticipation of something long awaited, the fates of the two young people of this story intertwined. Rolando Angeliquino, a man with a magnetism capable of attracting the attention of others, could not help but notice the exciting gaze of Karen Oviedo. She was a woman with fire in her eyes, a passion for life, and an energy that instantly won his heart. The young people were very similar in their interests and dreams, and the determination and entrepreneurial thirst of both inspired them. This meeting was an accident that gave them a chance for true happiness. Finally, they found in this relationship what they had been looking for in others for so long. So in 2016, the lovers started living together and opened their own business, a warehouse, which was located in the house where they lived. Karen has always had a special eye for detail, and she lovingly created a sign on one of the windows for customer service. Next to it were lists of items for sale. It was their little corner that they were rightfully proud of. The people of Marital watched this happy and determined couple with interest and respect. Everyone wondered who these young people were and how they managed to accomplish so much. Many people knew Karen from childhood, but Rolando remained a mystery. No one knew anything about his past, except that he came from Bolivia. Rolando not only ran the business with Karen, but also worked at the fair in Guimalin, where wholesale fruit sales were held. Looking at this couple, It seemed like they had found their little paradise on Earth. But sometimes, even the strongest and most sincere relationships can face a test. One day, Rolando was taken aback when he caught Karen in the car with another man. His reaction was a flash of anger. In that moment, he nearly destroyed everything inside the interior of the car. The picture of happiness crumbled in a matter of minutes. But then, Rolando agreed to give them a chance, choosing to forgive and continue to move forward with his beloved. In the eyes of others, they remained a model of an ideal couple, able to overcome all difficulties together. Rolando Angel Aquino is an enigmatic figure who was born in 1987 in Bolivia. His exact date of arrival in Argentina remains unknown, like many other aspects of his life. As the eldest of 7 children in his family, Rolando learned from an early age the value of family bonds and hard work. His ideal was a happy family filled with joy and children's laughter. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez, from whom he later had a son. Despite the difficulties, the couple remained on good terms. Later in his life appeared Soledad Guardio, who gave him another son, Elias. Relationships with Soledad also did not work out. However, Rolando was always a devoted father who took care of his children. He kept in touch and always maintained a warm relationship with the mothers of his children. From a young age, Rolando was a physically fit man who took care of his health by playing sports and playing soccer for the local team. Colleagues and loved ones described him as a kind and very hardworking man. Neighbors in his neighborhood got along well with him, but Rolando always showed a distinct shyness in socializing. Karen was born March 30th, 1990, and spent her childhood and youth in Minato, in the same house where she and Rolando later established their warehouse. She was well known among the locals as an outgoing and open-minded woman.
Like Rolando, Karen dreamed of a happy and successful family with a caring and devotedly loving man. However, it took her some time to find the one man with whom she could build her happiness. Before meeting Rolando, Karen had already attempted to create a happy relationship that resulted in the birth of 2 wonderful girls. One of her former partners, Raul Ojeda, became the father of one of them, and Karen married him in 2013. However, as time went on, that marriage was on the verge of breaking up. According to Raul, financial difficulties were one of the reasons for the conflict. Worried about his life and in search of new opportunities, Raul decided to leave his family. On the pretext of buying some necessary item, he fled the city and traveled abroad, changing buses to make it difficult to track his whereabouts. In this way, he sought to evade all attempts to locate him. In the summer of 2019, 9-year-old Elias arrived at Rolando and Karen's house. They had many plans for the near future that they wanted to spend together. However, on the morning of July 12, 2019, when Rolando came to wish his son a good morning before leaving for work, he noticed that the boy was not feeling well. The father immediately decided to take his son to the children's hospital to see a pediatrician. There, after examination, it became clear that Elias's condition is critical, and he was immediately sent to the intensive care unit. Despite the best efforts of the medical staff, little Elias died shortly after he was brought to the hospital. The amazing thing was that he left home perfectly healthy, without any unusual symptoms, and arrived at his father's house also perfectly healthy. However, the medical report was devastating. It stated that Elias died of 3rd-degree poisoning, which caused multi-organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. These conclusions left Elias's parents in complete bewilderment, as their son seemed to be completely healthy and active, and suddenly died of an incomprehensible disease. Following their professional duty, the doctors insisted on conducting an additional forensic medical examination. However, Elias's mother and grandmother, dumbfounded by the loss, refused this procedure. Karen offered to cremate the boy's body, but Elias's mother also refused, preferring to bury her son in a private cemetery so that she could come and lay flowers on his grave. Elias's death was a blow that broke Rolando's heart. He was devastated by the unexpected loss of his youngest son. The caring and loving Karen never left Rolando for a moment. She took care of all the business, carefully supported her boyfriend, and helped him through his pain and grief. Over time, with the warmth and support of the woman he loved, the pain began to subside. 16 months after this terrible tragedy, Rolando decided to take a big step and propose to Karen. They got married, and the man was sure that this woman would always be by his side. However, their happiness turned out to be short-lived. On February 6, 2022, Karen returned home after a beauty salon and working out at the gym, and noticed that Rolando began to experience serious health problems. The next day, February 7th, she found a medical ambulance outside their home. Rolando, 35, suddenly felt very ill. After vomiting profusely, he collapsed in the living room of their home, and the housekeeper called for emergency medical help. The doctors allowed Karen to pass to her husband. When Rolando was taken to the Santa Maria clinic, his condition was critical. Despite the efforts of the medical staff, the young man passed away on February 9th. The cause of his death was severe poisoning. Given that Rolando was a healthy man who was active in sports, the medical staff began to ask questions of his wife. Karen confirmed that Rolando was taking medication to remove dark spots on his skin. For specialists, this information was highly suspicious. Tests revealed a significant excess of calcium oxalate crystals in Rolando's system, which is a characteristic sign of poisoning by ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreeze for cars. The investigation into this strange and unexpected death of Rolando became a high priority for authorities. The prosecutor's office was actively investigating the neighborhood where the Aquino couple lived. Neighbors became important witnesses, reporting that Karen had repeatedly given her husband some unknown medication. They were aware that she used these medications to go to a party without her husband. However, neighbors also expressed doubts about what happened to Rolando's son, which led investigators to think and consider the theory that Karen may have only wanted to temporarily sedate her husband rather than take his life. However, the findings of the Technology Crimes Unit officers completely ruled out this hypothesis. Requests for various forensic examinations were sent, and Karen, the wife of the deceased, was thoroughly questioned. Many contradictions arose during the interrogation. The investigating officers called on Karen to name the substance she had slipped to her husband before his death. The woman claimed that it was just a skin blemish remedy and that she had administered it through an IV. However, when she was asked to provide a vial of the solution, Karen said that the housekeeper had already thrown the drug away. A further interview was then conducted with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who denied Karen's statement regarding the discarded vial. She also reported that she had overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was receiving. Karen was detained during the investigation, and her cell phone was seized. Rolando's family, friends, and teammates were shocked by the news of his death. For visitors to the Aquino couple's warehouse and other locals, it was also a shock. No one could understand what had happened or why the father of the family had bid farewell to the world so suddenly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was extremely surprised when rumors of a deliberate poisoning began to spread. He claimed that his ex-spouse was always affectionate and never violent towards him. After analyzing the suspect's phone, it was discovered that Karen had searched a search engine for information on the deadliest poisons and how to clear her search history. In addition, records of her 2 ethylene glycol orders from an online store were found. The Agency for Toxic Substances, as well as the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, found that it is a synthetic substance that absorbs water and is used in the production of antifreeze. This product is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. With the preliminary results of the forensic examination and all the information discovered, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with willfully poisoning Rolando with a poisonous substance diluted with orange juice. Consumption of this beverage caused Rolando's health to seriously deteriorate, and he died. A series of strange and tragic events in the Aquino family forced the authorities to take drastic action. By mid-February, with enough evidence against Karen, an aggravated murder charge was filed. In parallel, suspicions surfaced as to the cause of 9-year-old Elias's death, triggering a new investigation. The prosecutor's office decided to conduct a detailed investigation into the boy's medical history. The mother claimed that Elias was fully healthy and active, and that he had suddenly gone into a coma while at his father's house, from which he never came out. The boy's death certificate indicated that the cause was a malfunction of his internal systems and cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators persistently doubted that Elias at age 9 could have died of such causes, especially given his overall health. The prosecutor's office requested information about possible purchases of ethylene glycol and received a response confirming that Karen purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, shortly before the boy arrived at the Aquino home. Information from Elias's relatives also confirmed that Karen insisted on cremating his body, but the birth mother rejected the idea and preferred to bury her son. The evidence gathered was enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file new aggravated murder charges against Karen on March 4th, related to the poisoning of Elias. On March 14th, a judge ordered pre-trial detention for the woman, who tried to appeal, but the judge rejected it, affirming that she should remain behind bars until the trial began. That trial began 10 months later and was an important step in unraveling this complex and dark story. The long-awaited trial began in the Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting public immediate attention. November 28, 2022 was the beginning of the nationwide trial of Karen Oviedo. 2 indictments were pending. The first, led by prosecutor Fernando Guzzo, concerned the murder of Elias, and the second, involving Claudia Rios, touched on the murder of Rolando. When the trial began, Rolando's eldest son, Javier Aquino, who was only 15 years old, appeared as a plaintiff, supported by counsel.
Prosecutor Guzzo argued that Karen killed first Elias, and then his father by giving them ethylene glycol mixed with orange juice. This led to the severe poisoning and death of the son and father. Karen's defense representatives sought to refute the charges against her. They argued that Rolando was violent and abusive to their client, and that there was no credible evidence to support the allegations. The defense also stressed that Karen had no motive for the murder. Why would she kill Elias? Obviously, little Elias could not have posed a threat. Karen's attorney pointed out that the house, cars, and business belonged only to her. He also argued that her client had not made any purchases through her phone, and why would she have searched the internet for information about poisons when she had already used ethylene glycol to poison Elias, as the prosecutor claimed. The lawyer emphasized that while the actions that led to the deaths of the father and son are heinous, it does not give the right to indict a person until they are fully proven guilty. The defense attempted to sow doubt among the jury by arguing that the charges against Karen were false, and Karen claimed that the antifreeze purchase could have been made by her partner by hacking into her account. She also claimed she had an alibi for when her husband was poisoned. On February 6th, Karen was not at home when he began having health problems. The defendant, known to the media as the Guaymalan poisoner, was given the opportunity to speak after the initial phase of the trial was over. Judge Diego Liberty allowed her to speak, and Karen passionately argued that she was being accused of a horrific crime she did not commit. It was extremely painful for her to realize this, especially since she was the mother of 2 young daughters. The court hearing continued, and it was the turn of witness testimony that revealed new aspects of the case. The prosecution decided to address several questions to Karen. Prosecutor Guzzo, focusing on key points, asked her if Karen had suggested that her son Rolando be cremated. To this question, Karen responded emphatically that the decision on this matter was not up to her, and she had never made any such suggestion. The prosecution called as witnesses relatives of the deceased to reveal further details of what had happened. Soledad, Elias's mother, told the court that after her son's death, Rolando relayed to her Karen's words, in which she suggested that Elias's body be cremated so that both families could keep the boy's ashes. However, Soledad rejected the idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where she was told about Karen's jealousy. According to her, Karen even slept in a separate bed, that the relationship between Rolando and Karen was so tainted that the couple slept separately. Another witness was Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child. She confirmed that according to her ex-husband, the couple slept separately, but Carolina herself had not had any interaction with Karen prior to the incident. However, on the morning of February 8th, Karen herself called her to inform her that Rolando was sick and in the hospital. Karen told Carolina that her husband had probably taken some medication and was feeling ill. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock her husband's cell phone, claiming that she had suspicions that he was seeing another woman. Carolina was shocked to learn of Rolando's condition, as they had seen each other just a few days ago and he seemed perfectly healthy. She revealed that when she arrived at the hospital, Karen was already there and had gone to see the doctors. Caroline wasn't allowed inside, so she was left waiting. Later, as she was leaving the hospital, Karen told her that no one else was there and everyone had left. This made Caroline very suspicious, and she demanded an explanation from the doctors, to which the doctor announced that the patient had lost consciousness and was not responding to treatment. Caroline then went to the hospital secretary and complained. After talking to Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, after which he had had an allergic reaction. She claimed that the medication bottle no longer existed because the housekeeper had thrown it away. All these details added to the mystery of this complex case. The trial continued, and now doctors and experts stood before the jury to present forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination. This evidence threw light on details that had gone unnoticed earlier. Dr. Ivana Marimelli, a pediatrician at the hospital, described how she cared for Elias in July 2019 when the boy was hospitalized. She described that Elias was brought to the medical facility with severe breathing difficulties and urgently required intubation. He also underwent a CT scan which revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis. Elias was given a course of intensive care. The doctor also confirmed that the symptoms that Elias had were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. This included impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a subsequent coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. Despite the best efforts of medical personnel, the boy's condition worsened, and after 5 p.m. on July 12th, cardiac and respiratory arrest ensued. Doctors tried to resuscitate Elias for 50 minutes with the participation of his father, but all efforts were futile. He was pronounced dead at 6 p.m. The jury also read the results of Karen's psychological examination, conducted at the request of the prosecution. In their findings, the experts emphasized that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. She was presented as a person seeking to create an image of a decent person, but in reality she was characterized as cold and cruel.
In their conclusions, the experts also noted that a psychological examination was conducted immediately after Karen's husband's death, but did not reveal any emotional effects related to the loss of her spouse. This raised doubts about Karen's sincerity and characterized her as a cold-blooded and self-focused woman. The examiners found evidence of latent hostility and impulsive behavioral reactions in Karen. Finally, a prosecutor Vuzo expressed doubt that Karen was a victim of gender-based violence as she portrayed herself in her testimony. All of this information described the true psychological profile of the defendant. The long weeks of tense waiting and continuous court hearings came to a close. The trial brought many people together in the courtroom, their eyes fixed tensely on the jury and the judge, awaiting the decision that would bring justice to this complex and tragic story. The prosecutor, in moving for a judgment of conviction against Karen, assured the jury that all the evidence gathered strongly suggested that she was the one who planned and committed both murders. She purchased ethylene glycol in cold blood, disposed of the packaging, and disguised it as regular juice. Karen watched her loved ones die without providing help in their moment of suffering. Prosecutor Claudia Rios, who was prosecuting Karen's case for Rolando's murder, provided the court with an ethylene glycol purchase sheet paid from Karen's bank account. The prosecution and the plaintiff insisted that the jury reach a unanimous verdict because that would be the only way to achieve justice in the case. They insisted that Karen Oviedo be found guilty of murder with evidence of extreme cruelty. The defense, on the other hand, insisted that there was insufficient evidence to fully prove her client's guilt. The defense attorney argued that a person can be good or bad, but that it is not always related to the commission of a crime, and that for their client, the death of Rolando and his son was an incredible tragedy and a sad event. However, despite the arguments of the defense, Karen Oviedo has put herself on the list of Argentine criminals who poisoned their victims. After a long silence and tense waiting for the verdict, the jury made their decision. They handed down a unanimous verdict. Karen Oviedo was found guilty of killing Elias and committing the crime with particular cruelty. She was also found guilty of Rolando's aggravated death by insidious procedure. Karen, standing in her black outfit with white beads around her neck, listened to the verdict without apparent emotion. The jury reached a guilty verdict. She was awarded a life sentence in prison. Karen Oviedo, the woman in the dock, tried to escape punishment for the treacherous murders that shook society and left many unsolved questions. Her plans to cremate the bodies of the victims may have been her last attempt to escape the punishment she deserved. However, despite her tricks, the court and jury did not give in and rendered a just verdict. So why did Karen Oviedo kill her loved ones? That remains a mystery. She had everything she needed to be happy. Perhaps the motive lies in the depths of her own soul, in jealousy, self-interest, pride. Karen refused to admit her guilt, which is why the motives behind this horrific crime remain unclear. Karen Oviedo will now face long years behind bars, pondering what dark forces may have so badly ruined her and those around her. This is a story that reminds us that even the closest of relationships can hide terrible secrets and mysteries, and that true love and loyalty must always come first. The Salma Montes case. Why did a young student pay with her life? Our today's story, widely publicized as the Salma Montes case, took place in Mexico just a few years ago. The victim was a young law school student who was guilty of breaking off her engagement to her fiancé, who abused her. For this, the 22-year-old girl paid for her life in the most brutal way, and her executioner, with the support of loved ones, was confident that he would escape punishment. In a wicked irony of fate, Salma studied at the faculty, specializing in crimes against women. Who is Salma Montes? Our current heroine was born in 1996, November 18th, in a small Mexican town, Delicias, located in the state of Chihuahua, in the northern part of the country. The full name given to her at birth is Salma Yajaira Montes Soto. She was the youngest of 2 children in the family and was raised with her older sister Karen. The girl's birth father, whose name was Gabriel, passed away from a heart attack when Salma was barely 4 years old, and her sister was 8 years old. Since then, their mother Soledad raised the children on her own. The woman never married again and devoted herself to her daughters, doing everything to ensure that they did not need anything. Salma grew up a kind, sociable, and responsive girl. She had many friends from an early age. She adored animals and always came to the aid of others at the first call. Those around her characterized her as a petite, smiling brunette with incredibly beautiful eyes and a kind soul. As a child, Salma, playing with her sister, fell off the swing and split her eyebrow, which left her a small scar in the form of a crescent moon, but it did not spoil her attractive appearance, and rather even became a kind of highlight. In adolescence, the girl, like many of her peers, decided to make a few small tattoos, which, as it seemed, reflected her inner world and state of mind. Her mother, although she was a person of conservative views, did not object and prevent her younger daughter's self-expression. She did well in school, although she was not an excellent student. She dreamed of getting a higher education, but knew that her family has no money to pay for expensive university tuition, and therefore made every effort to get a scholarship and study for free. Although not without difficulty, but Salma succeeded, and she became a student at the prestigious National Autonomous University of Mexico. The girl entered the Faculty of Law, choosing a specialization, crimes against women. Roman with a butcher. In 2006, the 20-year-old student met a young man whose name was Kevin Gualberto Pilcaster. The guy was 5 years older than her. He worked as a cook in one of the local catering establishments and dreamed of a career as a restaurateur. It is noteworthy that the young man began his professional career as a butcher, cutting up cattle carcasses in a butcher's shop owned by his family. Kevin was quite nice, good-looking, and courteous. He knew how to make a good impression, and he seemed to Salma to be a good guy. Between them began a friendly communication, which very quickly turned into a romantic relationship. 5-year age difference was not a serious obstacle, and about a year later the couple officially engaged. Members of the Pilcaster family gladly accepted Salma, despite the fact that her family was much more modest in terms of material wealth. They believed that the young beauty has a positive effect on Kevin, who next to her literally glowed with happiness. But there was another reason, which they preferred not to talk about. As it turned out, the guy had attacks of aggression, from which suffered all those who were unlucky to be at that moment near. However, after the engagement, as it seemed to everyone, he became a little more restrained and calm. But Soledad and Karen did not want to be related to the rich chosen Salma. They noticed a change in Salma's behavior, which caused them genuine concern. Since the beginning of their relationship with Kevin, she became withdrawn, often crying, closed in his room, and from the smiling and cheerful leader has not left a trace. At the same time, Salma desperately tried to convince her mother and sister that she was fine. In addition, her face and body were periodically bruised, which she carefully tried to hide, and their origin was not explained in any way, avoiding an answer. When Salma accepted a marriage proposal from her boyfriend, her loved ones were shocked and desperately tried to dissuade her from marrying a guy who abuses her. But the young student, despite everything, was in love with her chosen one and naively believed that everything would change for the better. A scandalous breakup. Time passed, and Kevin became more and more irascible, aggressive, and intemperate. He was jealous of his passport literally to every pillar, forbade her to communicate with fellow students, and in general with any guys, and also demanded that Salma daily reported to him about where she was and with whom she saw. On this ground, the couple constantly quarreled, and the young man often put his fists into action. At the end of March 2019, after another major quarrel, which ended in manhandling, Salma broke off the engagement just a couple of months before the planned wedding. For her fiancé, it turned out to be a terrible blow, but not because he loved the girl, was very worried about it and wanted to fix everything, but because he took the deed of the chosen one as a personal insult. First time, Kevin tried to return the bride, but he did it in an ultimatum and orderly form. When he realized that she did not want to see him anymore, he suddenly changed tactics. He again became courteous and polite, as at the beginning of their relationship, offered the former lover to remain friends and continued to communicate. A couple of weeks after the breakup, the young people finally calmly talked and seemed to have figured everything out. Salma at the time was actively preparing for the defense of the diploma, had an internship, and was too busy studying, and therefore about the conflict with her former fiancé and broken engagement almost did not think. When on May 31st, Salma unexpectedly called Kevin and proposed to meet, she did not think it strange or suspicious, and she agreed. They agreed to see each other that evening in the parking lot outside the local Natural History Museum on the northeast side of town. The guy worked near the place and often left his car there. After school, Salma was given a ride to the building by a close friend of hers named Violet. Since it was Friday night, they said goodbye until Monday, agreeing to go to the library together that day to study. There was a Ford Transit van in the parking lot, which belonged to Kevin's parents and which he himself used as his work vehicle. The young man was supposed to show up any minute, so Salma headed for the car while her friend went home. Salma has not been seen alive since. Disappearance of a student. When Salma did not return home in the evening, her mother and sister sounded the alarm. She always warned her loved ones if she was going to stay out late or spend the night at a friend's house. About the planned meeting with Kevin, Soledad and Karen did not even guess, because Salma, not wanting to upset them, hid it from them. The student's cell phone was turned off, and after several hours of unsuccessful attempts to reach her, her mother and sister began to call her friends, but they could not help. When the relatives contacted Violet, she said that Salma was going to meet her ex-fiancé, and she drove her to the meeting. At this point, the women realized that something terrible had happened, and it was time to sound the alarm. They immediately, right in the middle of the night, went to the police station, where they reported the disappearance of Salma, as well as their terrible guesses about what might have happened. Law enforcers took the statement of the concerned women seriously and quickly began searching for the missing student. The first thing was questioned Violet, who last saw Salma. She confirmed that she took her friend to meet her ex-fiancé, and they said goodbye in the parking lot. And a couple of hours later, Salma Montes' phone was turned off and unavailable. Kevin, who was visited by the police in the morning, said he saw his ex-fiancée in the parking lot. They talked for a while and went their separate ways. It was obvious that the guy was not telling us something, but he had nothing to show for it. Less than 24 hours had passed since Salma's disappearance, and there was still hope that she would soon turn up alive and unharmed, and there were no good reasons for detention, searches, and interrogations, so the investigators limited themselves to talking outside the station and collecting testimony. Salma's friends, fellow students, and relatives took an active part in the search for her. They pasted flyers with her photos around the city, created posts on social networks, through which they asked to share any relevant information about Salma's whereabouts. The missing person was described as a petite, skinny brunette with light skin and brown eyes. Among the special features mentioned were her tattoos, 3 hearts on her stomach and musical notes on her right arm, as well as a small scar above her eyebrow. She was carrying a cloth backpack with textbooks, notes, and a student ID card, which she always carried with her. A grisly find on the banks of the canal. On June 7, 2019, a badly disfigured and decomposed human body was found on the bank of a canal miles away from the interstate highway, the appearance of which was literally shocking. The hands were missing, the skin had been stripped off in places, the hair had been burned off, and the face had been mutilated beyond recognition. In addition, all teeth had been removed, and no personal belongings or clothing could be found. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a deep wound in the neck inflicted by the precise blow of a sharp knife. As a result of this action, the carotid artery was damaged, and the girl literally bled to death in a couple of minutes, and all other injuries were inflicted posthumously. Obviously, the perpetrator did everything possible to make the body unrecognizable, either by fingerprints, dental records, or any special features or external data. Experts only agreed that it was a young girl aged 25 years old, and it was immediately suggested that the body belongs to Salma Montes, who disappeared a week ago and whose story was actively replicated in the press. The mother and sister of the girl were invited to the identification, but they could not recognize their relative in the disfigured corpse. The women simply refused to believe that someone could have treated the kind-hearted and sympathetic Salma so cruelly. In order to unambiguously identify the identity of the victim, required an expensive DNA examination. However, the Montes family had no money for such research, so the test was conducted by a state laboratory, whose equipment left much to be desired, and the probability of error or inaccuracy was quite high. Unfortunately, the results of the examination confirmed that the mutilated body found did indeed belong to the missing student. However, the grief-stricken relatives of the girl still refused to believe it, and announced on social networks to raise funds for a second examination in a private laboratory with more accurate and modern equipment. Hundreds of concerned people responded to their request, and the necessary amount of money was collected quickly enough, but, alas, the retest only confirmed the results of the previous one. It was Salma, the only suspect. Relatives and close friends of the deceased in one voice claimed that she had no enemies or ill-wishers, but at the same time, almost all mentioned her troubled relationship with Kevin Pilcaster, with whom she broke off her engagement about a month before her disappearance. Salma's mother and sister claimed that her ex-fiancé abused and beat her, which is why she decided to break up with him. It would seem that this guy should have been the main, if not the only, suspect from the beginning. But until the body was identified, he remained at large and his house, car, and personal belongings were not searched, which gave him a great opportunity to get rid of the evidence. Only 2 weeks after Salma's disappearance, and a week after the discovery of her body, Kevin was taken into custody on charges of kidnapping and brutalizing his former fiancée. The young man himself categorically denied his guilt, although he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. However, his testimony has largely changed. The new version and found evidence. In the opinion of forensic experts, an experienced butcher or surgeon worked on the body of the girl. The hands were separated from the body with precise cuts on the joints, which spoke of a good knowledge of anatomy. The skin was also expertly and skillfully removed. As it turned out, the perpetrator removed it in places where there were tattoos, as well as noticeable birthmarks in order to eliminate the possibility of identifying the body by them. Since Kevin had worked as a butcher in the past and had extensive experience in cutting carcasses, The prosecution tried to cling to this thread, but the defendant's lawyers insisted that it was a mere coincidence, and this circumstance could not be used in court as evidence of their client's involvement in the case. According to the new version told by Pilcaster after his arrest, that evening they actually met with his ex-fiancée in a parking lot near his work. They were just talking when suddenly another guy approached them, who, according to Kevin, was Salma's new boyfriend. Allegedly, this guy was jealous of the girl's former fiancée and punched her in the face with a swing, but the defendant stood up for Salma. He told her to take shelter in his van, and he himself decided to deal with the offender in a manly manner. However, the fight had barely started when Salma jumped out of the van and begged Kevin not to hurt her boyfriend. After that, Salma and the stranger left, and Pilcaster went home. The defendant's parents and grandmother, who were called as witnesses, claimed that he returned home at midnight, changed his clothes, and went out with his new girlfriend named Consuela. Soon, the girl herself showed up at the station to confirm Kevin's alibi, saying that on that fateful night he was with her and could not have committed the crime, and then cover his tracks. The van in which the suspect was traveling was seized, and inside the vehicle was found washed-up traces of blood belonging to the deceased. In response, the young man claimed that Salma had gotten the nosebleed after a jealous boyfriend punched her, and she probably left a trail when she hid in the van while the men worked things out. However, according to Salma's family and friends, no new boyfriend has appeared for her since her breakup with her fiancé. She was completely absorbed in her studies, wrote a diploma, and preparing for his defense. By the way, to find this mysterious boyfriend, which Kevin could not even thickly describe, and failed, most likely because he made him up. Despite the new details and Consuela, who came out of nowhere to confirm the alibi of the accused, the whole story looked very strange and unreliable. Nevertheless, the court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was insufficient to convict. Pilcaster was acquitted and released from the courtroom in August 2019. Escape from the city. Almost immediately after his release, the young man hurriedly left his hometown, and for about 6 months did not give any news of himself at all. This caused a storm of indignation among the relatives of the murdered girl because the case was not closed. The investigation continued, and the only suspect was simply released like this. In fact, letting him escape. As this unprecedentedly brutal case became publicized, and its details were covered in the press for about 2 months, many residents of the city decided to express their support for the Montes family. People gathered at spontaneous rallies, demanding to find Kevin and to reopen the case against him, because he was clearly not telling something, and the story he told was not believable. Salma's family and the activists who helped them succeeded in getting the investigation reopened, and a second search of the suspect's home revealed a hidden cache in the wall containing Kevin's bloody clothes and a large kitchen knife, which he had probably used to kill and then partially cut up his victim.
Most likely, he had not had time or was afraid to dispose of this evidence, believing that no one would find it in the stash. At almost the same time, Pilcaster, apparently following the advice of his lawyers, decided to make himself known and go on the attack. He didn't just make himself known, he filed a lawsuit against the Montes family, accusing them of slander, organizing his harassment, and tampering with evidence. The man said he was forced to leave town because he feared for his life because of the harassment organized by Soledad and Karen. In his opinion, the women had turned the entire town against him, and he was simply afraid of being lynched. As evidence, Kevin provided a mass of anonymous, threatening messages that he received on a daily basis, all because his personal information, including his phone number and email address, was published on the internet, as he assumed it was done by relatives of his ex-fiancée. He also claimed that he was being guarded under the house by unknown people who threatened to do away with him and his family. Following the gruesome discovery at the Pilcaster home, Kevin has once again become the prime suspect in the murder case and has once again been taken into custody. At the same time, the man and his lawyers insisted that the evidence was planted on him and also accused the Attorney General of collusion with the Montes family and the deliberate concealment of part of the CCTV footage, which allegedly could prove the innocence of the defendant and confirm his alibi. However, no such recordings were found because they simply did not exist. A new investigation and a protracted trial. Before Kevin could be taken back into custody, it was necessary to overturn his previous acquittal. This process was somewhat protracted because the judge did not want to admit his mistake and insisted that his decision was correct and only right. However, after several sessions, the verdict was overturned, after which a new case was started, taking into account the discovered evidence. In this regard, Kevin's parents and grandmother decided to organize a real press conference, during which, answering questions from journalists, called their family members victims of the machinations of Soledad and Karen Montes. According to them, these women from the beginning were against the relationship between Kevin and Salma, while the pillcasters loved Salma with all their hearts and already considered her a member of their family. They also claimed that they were literally crushed by the news of the death of the failed daughter-in-law, and soon they were in for another shock when their son was accused of Salma's murder. The suspect himself in the interrogation did not hide the fact that they had a difficult relationship with the former lover and even confirmed that, at times, raised his hand on her. He justified his actions by the fact that Salma, allegedly, he cheated and he had the right to punish her. He also did not hide that he was annoyed when Salma broke off the engagement, which she, in his opinion, had no right to do, because it offended him as a man. A new trial did not begin until June 2020. This time Kevin was charged with kidnapping and aggravated brutal murder motivated by gender-based hate. In fact, he himself led the investigation to this conclusion, constantly repeating, "A woman had no right to act and speak like that." The collected evidence, including the bloody clothes and the knife, which was recognized as the murder weapon, as well as the testimony of witnesses, was enough to convict. And the story previously told by Kevin about Salma's new boyfriend, who, in his opinion, and was the real culprit, simply fell apart because there was no other guy in the parking lot or in the life of Salma. However, the prosecution requested time to complete the investigation, and the court agreed to grant the request. In this regard, it was decided to send the defendant for 6 months of pre-trial detention in a maximum security prison. But due to the coronavirus pandemic that swept the world, the investigation was delayed, and court hearings were repeatedly postponed. So Kevin's 6-month pre-trial detention dragged on for almost 2 years. A fair sentence. It wasn't until May 2023, on the eve of the 4th anniversary of the crime, that a new hearing was held, at which the prosecution presented all the evidence it had managed to uncover in the meantime. In court, several witnesses testified to the fact that Pillcaster abused his fiancée, beat her, and sought to control her every move, depriving her of any freedom. He treated her like a thing that belonged only to him and did not accept the fact that she chose to leave him. On August 16, 2023, Kevin was found guilty of aggravated murder as well as cruelty to the body. As for the kidnapping, this point of the charge, according to the judge, was not proven, because Salma herself came to meet with her ex-fiancé and herself could get into his car. Nevertheless, the evidence presented in the courtroom was enough to send a young man to prison for life. More precisely, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison. But if we take into account that at that time the defendant was 32 years old, it is fair to say that such a sentence became for him a life sentence. In addition, Kevin was required to pay the Montes family about $45,000 as moral compensation. Salma's mother and sister later stated that they were quite satisfied with the verdict, although Pillcaster never admitted his guilt, did not repent, and did not explain the motives for his terrible and inhumane act.